Una vera linea avanzata della sicurezza euroatlantica, una priorità strategica per il governo. Proprio questa settimana ho partecipato alla riunione dei ministri degli esteri della NATO. In tutti i miei interventi ho insistito sull'importanza della sicurezza del fianco sud, nel quadro di un approccio della nostra sicurezza che deve essere a 360 gradi. Dall'Ucraina al Sahel, il fronte della sicurezza atlantico è uno solo e l'Italia è ovunque in prima linea. Siamo a fianco di Kiev e degli alleati nel fianco est. Lavoriamo per consolidare l'attenzione sull'area dei Balcani, per noi prioritaria, per contenere l'influenza dei nostri avversari. Siamo i principali fautori di una più strutturata azione per la stabilità del Mediterraneo allargato e dell'Africa, anche per le ricadute sulla sicurezza marittima, sicurezza energetica e stabilità delle infrastrutture critiche. La cooperazione con i paesi partner della regione è essenziale. L'impulso degli ultimi mesi va consolidato e trasformato in risultati misurabili in vista dei prossimi appuntamenti alleati e del vertice di Ankara. L'apertura dell'ufficio NATO ad Amman, ospitato presso la nostra ambasciata, e la nomina del rappresentante speciale per il vicinato meridionale sono avanzamenti significativi. L'Italia è impegnata a sostenere questo processo. È fondamentale assicurare capacità concrete di sostegno istituzionale e operativo. Alcuni snodi sono particolarmente cruciali, anche per la crescente assertività di attori esterni e il moltiplicarsi delle minacce ibride. Penso in particolare alla Libia e al Sahel, aree dove l'Italia è in prima linea anche per favorire un più coeso ed efficace impegno internazionale. Il mantenimento della nostra missione militare in Niger, la MISIN, è una concreta dimostrazione del nostro impegno. La costruzione di un pilastro europeo credibile all'interno dell'Alleanza Atlantica rappresenta un moltiplicatore fondamentale della nostra risposta in tutti gli scenari. Anche in questo ambito il contributo dell'Italia è concreto e fattivo. La sicurezza dell'area euroatlantica inizia dalle nostre coste meridionali. Garantirla significa proteggere le nostre società, la nostra economia, il nostro futuro. Le riflessioni odierne contribuiranno a definire il nostro impegno comune in questa direzione. Buon lavoro a tutti, Antonio Tajani.
Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio. Of course, you had the message from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy in Italian, because he speaks in Italian, being the foreign minister. But the message was a good message, a message of, how can I say, of understanding, of encouragement to us to continue in this work, looking at security, cooperative security, putting people together towards a better world. And of course, identifying the Middle East, North Africa, and Sahel as a very important objective to be reached, because we are now thinking about Eastern Europe, but this is the agenda of today, but we have to look at the agenda of today and tomorrow especially. So, I would like to say just a few words welcoming you here. And notably, we are looking at the Middle East, but not only the Middle East, because now there is a direction that we call the South, which is not defined precisely, but is the direction of world security and what we want to achieve. And this foundation has a long record of focusing on this part of the world. And the first conference 14 years ago was NATO and the Arab Springs. So we start from there and we continue in these directions. The issues of stake, of course, we know them. Political stability, strategic developments, regional cooperation, the civil society. We don't pretend to solve the problems, and we wish to address them in a spirit of understanding. We define our objective, which is the objective of this conference, of contributing to a good analysis that can lead to a better environment in terms of security and regional cooperation. The Middle East, as well as parts of Africa like the Sahel, are important regions. They often make the first pages, but what is significant for us is that there is a process of transformation underway. Strategic developments that can lead to new different outcomes, starting from the fragmentation and leading to a more mature regional cooperation and a vibrant society, together with a more shared well-being and a peaceful future. And that is why I welcome especially the representatives of the Arab League and the Gulf Cooperation Council, because they give this touch that we think is very central to our issues. We aim to look at the big picture and not to focus on specific issues, important as we know they are, because they are already monitored by everybody, and we cannot give an added value here. I wish to underline today that NATO continues to have a specific interest in terms of cooperative security. Two important partnerships were launched in 2004, the Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, addressing 13 countries from Mauritania in the Atlantic to Oman in the Indian Ocean. Some concrete results were achieved because the objective of this partnership is practical cooperation, not big political principles. A formula that helps to develop good relations, promoting common projects. And its main principles are joint ownership and prior consultation. Very important to be prior consultation and joint ownership, not dictating any idea to anybody. We know that in recent years, the events in Eastern Europe have attracted the main attention of the alliance. Anywhere, I draw to your attention on the fact that the Washington Summit last year decided to give a new impulse to this direction to the South, with a special action plan and an envoy who has been named to develop relations with the Southern Neighbourhood. I also underline that the European Union has created new structures for North Africa and the Middle East, and it is a welcome development, adding to the traditional role played in the region since a long time. I am personally happy, all of us in the Foundation, we're very happy to have so many good speakers and moderators having accepted our invitation to Rome and coming from many different angles, including, of course, also some personal friends. We look forward to a high-level scientific conversation in a spirit of mutual respect, as it is the tradition of our conferences. All my thanks, of course, to conclude, go to all those who have supported us. Special thanks to them, and you see them listed in our program. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good afternoon and a nice conference.
Ambassador, Special Representative for the South, members of the NATO Foundation, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to be here today on behalf of the NATO Defense College. And this is one of the few institutions where academics, military officers and diplomats meet to analyze global issues together. Our NDC mission is not only to educate, but also to understand, anticipate, and support NATO's strategic thinking. It is in this spirit that I address you today. Our Defense College will soon celebrate its 75th anniversary. We would all wish to mark this moment by a time of peace. This obviously won't be the case. But as Alcide de Gasperi reminded us, peace is not a gift, it is a duty. Today, this duty calls for clarity and realism. War has returned to Europe, and our attention tends to turn to the eastern flank, naturally. But this conflict should not make us forget a fundamental reality. We live in an interconnected world. Instability in the Middle East, North Africa, or the Sahel has immediate consequences for the entire Euro-Atlantic area. This is why at the Washington Summit in 2024, allies reaffirmed the importance of NATO's 360-degree approach. Security cannot be viewed from only one direction. Threats from the south and threats from the east do not compete with each other. They add up and reinforce one another. Our common security depends on both. In this context, the adoption of the NATO plan for the South was a key development. The alliance now clearly recognizes that stability in the Southern Neighbourhood is a major strategic priority. This understanding is strong among the European countries of the Mediterranean. That is Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. For them, the Southern Neighbourhood is neither distant nor abstract. They are directly affected by the challenges coming from this region. Security, economic, energy, and migration issues are part of their daily reality. Italy has long called for stronger attention to the South. Spain has been a driving force on maritime hybrid threats. France has a long history of engagement in the stabilization of the Sahel. Their experience, their proximity, and their regional knowledge also support a broader evolution, the gradual development of a European pillar within NATO. European countries' ability to understand and act in their immediate neighborhood makes them essential contributors to a comprehensive approach to Southern security. Their engagement strengthens NATO by providing informed perspective, long-established diplomatic relationships, and proven operational experience. A Europe more engaged in defense, a Europe fully interoperable with and complementary to the alliance, is not only a political objective, it is a strategic necessity, especially in this region. The emerging European pillar of NATO brings more coherence, more capacity, and more continuity to NATO's efforts in the South. Ladies and gentlemen, the Southern Neighbourhood is not a secondary concern. It is one of the essential foundations of our collective security. By renewing our political approach, strengthening cooperation with our partners, building on the expertise of European Mediterranean nations, and reinforcing the European pillar within the alliance, NATO equips itself with the tools needed for an effective, sustainable, and coherent action. To return one last time to the word of de Gasperi, the only lasting victory is the one we build together. May this spirit guide our discussions today. Thank you for your attention.
Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to join you again at this high-level NATO Defense College Foundation gathering, underlining our shared commitment to cooperative security across the South and the wider Euro-Atlantic space. On behalf of the International Council on Environmental Economics and Development, that is ICED, please allow me to express our appreciation for the Foundation's consistent leadership in convening dialogue that is not only analytical, but operationally consequential. It truly matters who meets in this room and when. Today's agenda makes one point unmistakable. Security in the South is no longer a regional category. It is a system-wide determinant of global stability. From the Middle East beyond the present, to a 360-degree security approach, and to the credible European pillar within NATO, our sessions reflect a strategic landscape in which governance, development, energy, migration, and deterrence are now inseparable. Let me note briefly, without overstatement, one emerging danger that threads through all of these regions: a renewed and quiet uptick in nuclear proliferation activity. Not the Cold War model of bipolar acceleration, but discrete regional acquisition interest, parallel fuel cycles, and tactical capability ambitions emerging from multiple directions simultaneously. This deserves sober attention, not alarm, calibration, not escalation. What distinguishes this conference and the Foundation's leadership is that our horizon is not defensive only, but preventative. We are here because the diplomacy, development frameworks, and deterrence calculus of the South are no longer peripheral. They are central, immediate, and structurally interlinked with Euro-Atlantic security logic. There is no elsewhere in security anymore. We at ICED remain committed in supporting NATO and partners represented here through three concrete pillars. First, human security as strategic security. Instability remains the most efficient fuel for escalation anywhere. Second, AI and emerging technology governance. Interoperability must now include predictive systems, cyber resilience, and intelligent alignment, not as optional architecture, but as baseline defense practice. And third, climate and resource-driven risk analysis. The fragility of water, food, and energy, access across the Sahel, Middle East, and North Africa, and the Gulf is not a humanitarian concern alone. It is a force multiplier of conflict behavior. As we listen to today's distinguished speakers, let us carry forward a guiding principle. Shared security is no longer defined by geography, but by shared responsibility in governance, capacity, and foresight. This is the era of interoperable responsibility. So, President Minuto Rizzo, I thank you once again for your leadership and for convening this dialogue at precisely the moment when clarity, not caution, must guide our collective agenda. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Good afternoon, everyone. Warm thanks to Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo, Alessandro Politi, and the NATO Foundation team for organizing this conference and asking me to offer you a brief opening greeting. The events of recent years have demonstrated how, in the current international situation, it is increasingly difficult to separate what is happening to the east of Europe from what is happening to the south. Almost impossible to draw a line between defense and security, and extremely dangerous to divide the spheres of action of the European Union and NATO. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the Middle East crisis are interconnected in one way or another, and the mere shift of focus from one front to the other can have significant implications for the evolution of the two situations. For this reason, it is important to develop a comprehensive strategy that takes both scenarios into account. The development of new technologies, particularly unmanned systems, and the realities of hybrid warfare and disinformation, which we are finally becoming aware of, as Admiral Cavo Dragone rightly pointed out a few days ago, have further blurred the distinction between internal security and defense, leading to the concept of global security that encompasses both. The United States' position toward NATO has changed. Let me remind you of a couple of facts. The absence of US Secretary of State Marco Rubio from the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting 2 days ago in Berlin, the first time in 20 years, and the recent statement by US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Fox News, quote, Now Putin has started making incursions into the NATO borders. The one thing I can tell you is the US is not going to get involved with troops or any of that. We will sell Europeans weapons. End quote. For this and other reasons, the US cannot currently be considered reliable, and this fact requires even improving and more effective cooperation between NATO's European pillar, including Canada, and the European Union. The NATO Foundation, as always, has clear vision of global scenarios and has included all these issues in the discussion of today's conference. It is clear that how the various dimensions unfold, the course of the war in Ukraine and the stabilization in the Middle East, the ever-increasing integration of systems needed to ensure Western security, the evolution of military procurement within NATO and the European Union, will also have a significant impact on the defense and security industry. For this reason, Leonardo not only closely monitors the development of the strategic situation to ensure it is ready to offer the necessary solutions at the right time, but also intends to make a valuable contribution to understanding the dynamics and defining the appropriate responses. I hope that today's discussion can contribute to a clearer and more shared vision of what is happening in the world and help everyone, according to their responsibilities, make the best decisions for the future of Europe, NATO, and the world. Happy conference to everyone.
Good afternoon again. Let me introduce you the first panel, Shifting Allied Priorities in the Euro-Atlantic Space, the Middle East Beyond the Present, with Chair Ahmad Massadeh, Ian Lesser, Mahmoud Karem, and Silvia Colombo. Please, the floor is yours.
I think you're here. Yes, Mahmoud is in the middle, yes. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and it's a pleasure and honor for me to be here with you today and to chair this very important session on shifting allied priorities in the Euro-Atlantic space, the Middle East and beyond. May I also start by thanking our hosts and the NATO Defense College Foundation and its co-partners for convening us today, in particular President Ambassador Alessandro Minotto Rizzo and also Alessandro Pollitti for convening us today. In fact, at a moment when strategic reflection is not a luxury, it is a necessity. I will need to use my glasses, and this proves that the world changes. 14 years ago, when I started speaking at these conferences, I did not use glasses. The Middle East, I will throw some opening remarks, personal remarks, so that we kick off our panel. The Middle East has long been viewed through the lens of crisis management. Yet today, we must go further beyond that, simply responding to emergencies. We need a vision for ending cycles of insecurity, not merely containing them. And this requires clear priorities, new partnerships, and a willingness to challenge established assumptions. There is first and foremost a fundamental human reality that we must all acknowledge: the ongoing suffering of the Palestinian people. For decades, this unresolved injustice has undermined regional stability, deepened mistrust, and diverted resources away from development, innovation, and peace. It is not possible to speak about future priorities in the Middle East without recognizing that a durable political solution, one that restores dignity, rights, and statehood to Palestinians, is indispensable to any lasting security architecture. We cannot allow the Middle East to remain trapped between humanitarian catastrophe on one side and geopolitical competition on the other side. Ending misery and restoring hope must be treated as a strategic interest, not merely a moral imperative. At the same time, I want to resist the idea that the region is only defined by conflict and uncertainty. There are shifting dynamics, some deeply familiar and some emerging in new ways that are reshaping allied calculations across the Euro-Atlantic space. One important dimension is the evolving role of the United States. There is a persistent narrative suggesting disengagement. And I would like to hear later on from our panelists on this narrative, in particular in light of the Trump engagement in the Middle East area. But I think a closer examination reveals a more nuanced picture. Selective involvement, strategic recalibration, and a search for shared approaches in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. We should ask what continuity exists beneath the debate over withdrawal and what the implications are for NATO partners. Another important dimension is institutional coherence. Today, multiple frameworks are advancing in parallel. For example, at the EU level, we have a Mediterranean charter, and more action plans have been developed. NATO has reaffirmed attention to the Southern Neighbourhood, and recent decisions, including the Washington Summit language on the southern flank, including that statements, and the appointment of the Special Representative for the Southern Neighbourhood and a liaison office or presence in Amman, reflect recognition that security in the Euro-Atlantic space begins to the south as much as to the east. Each of these initiatives holds potential, but parallel mechanisms do not automatically produce results. The real challenge, and probably opportunity, is integrating these instruments into a coherent, actionable roadmap that addresses human security, economic cooperation, climate resilience, and peace building together. We must also reflect on NATO's policies approach itself. Balancing collective defense on one front with sustained, meaningful engagement in the South is not easy. Cooperative security works in principle, but we also have to ask ourselves, has it worked in practice? And when it has not. Examples from across the MENA region, both successes and shortcomings, can help us understand where adaptability and innovation are most needed. Across these strategic dimensions, several themes stand out as common priorities: hybrid threats and disinformation, energy transition and water security, climate impacts and resource scarcity, migration flows and human rights, reconstruction and post-conflict stabilization, including in Gaza and Syria. These issues do not respect borders, and no single state or institution can handle them or manage them alone. On a personal relevance, for decades, Jordan embraced dialogue, coordination, and cooperation. Jordan has worked quietly, patiently, and constructively with its Euro-Atlantic partners to support peacekeeping, counterterrorism, intelligence cooperation, and also humanitarian response. The recent decision to open an office or establish a liaison office in Jordan is not merely symbolic. It reflects credibility, trust, and neutrality, and it offers a practical venue for bringing together Euro-Atlantic strategies with regional realities. If we are to shift priorities in a meaningful way, then we need strategic imagination alongside strategic patience. In other words, to invest in prevention in as much as response, to integrate humanitarian principles with security frameworks, and to ensure that new mechanisms work together, not in isolation. With these perspectives in mind, I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panelists and exploring how we can work together to build a Middle East where stability is sustainable, dignity is protected, and cooperation becomes the norm rather than the exception. And on this note, allow me to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ian Lesser. And Ian is no stranger to all of you. Ian is a distinguished fellow and advisor to the president of the German Marshall Fund of the United States in Brussels. We hope that we will hear Ian's perspectives on how US priorities in the Mediterranean are shifting and whether the popular narrative of US disengagement reflects reality or misunderstanding. Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the welcome. And let me add my thanks as well for the opportunity to be here again. It's a pleasure, and my thanks in particular to Alessandro and to many friends here. It's quite an extraordinary moment to be having this discussion. It always seems like it's an extraordinary moment to be having this discussion. But it's particularly interesting if you're going to talk for a couple of minutes anyway about the US perspective, because it coincidentally, just this morning, I suppose, the US released its national security strategy document, which is quite extraordinary and is already raised a lot of discussion, especially in Europe. It has some bearing on our conversation, actually. And so maybe I'll try to play off of that a little bit. It talks a lot about the United States looking south. Now, of course, it doesn't mean this south. It means the Western Hemisphere. But in fact, it sets up an interesting conversation about how the United States and Europe and southern partners around the Mediterranean will be thinking about their respective souths. And let me make three points to you briefly. One is the first on your point about disengagement. I think it's a myth. I think it's a myth. I think if we take it in its extreme form of the United States disengaging both physically and in diplomatic terms from the region, I think it's a bit of a myth. If we think about the Mediterranean. Indeed, a lot of people expected President Trump to be something of an isolationist, not having much to do with foreign policy. He's turning out to be a foreign policy president. We may like the direction of the policy or not, but he's activist, not isolationist. Maybe hyper-unilateralist. We could discuss it. But disengagement, withdrawal has not been the order of the day, especially in this region. Now, we could talk about, again, the nexus with what's happening on the European continent, vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia, and whether the US is going to be there in NATO in the same way in the future years, maybe not. I'll come back to that. But in terms of, if we just look around the region and the things that the administration has been doing, again, we may like them or not, but anyway, Gaza, the Abraham Accords going back to the first administration, Iran, the engagement with Turkey, Syria, the normalization, action in the Red Sea. This doesn't look to me like disengagement. Indeed, there's a larger naval and air presence in the Mediterranean today than there had been for decades. Some of it's gone to the Caribbean in recent weeks, but that's a different issue. The revolution, essentially, in the relationship with Greece and Cyprus in terms of security cooperation. So, I mean, that's across multiple administrations, obviously, but it's continued. So, no disengagement, I think. If we think about the United States in this region, historically, and it's a long history, it has been a mix of a few different things. By the way, I mean, the history of American engagement in this region is 200 years long, even a little older, actually, at this point. It's one of the first places the United States was engaged in the world. But it's always been a mix of relations, to European security on the one hand, connections to places beyond the Mediterranean per se, Black Sea, the Gulf, etc. On the other, Sub-Saharan Africa, and also just things that happen in the region, the crises, that it shouldn't just be about, as you say, Ambassador, but I mean, things that do nonetheless compel American attention. I think in different ways, for better or for worse, the idea of somehow bringing about a comprehensive peace in the Middle East remains the ultimate diplomatic prize for any American administration. Again, it may take forms that we like the path of it or not, but just look at the Sharm el-Sheikh experience, etc. It's not an example of disengagement. It's an example of something else. I do think that on the whole, and if you read this new national security strategy, the European security element in this, the NATO element in this, clearly does not have the priority it had certainly decades ago. They have a different view on the world now. It's a lower priority. Has the United States said radical things about NATO since the Trump administration came into power the second time? Not really. The burden sharing thing, I think, is sort of priced in. The style is a bit harsh, but people accept it. But the bigger questions really are over the horizon questions about how much will the U.S. be present in Europe over the coming decades, especially vis-a-vis the need to deter Russia. I do think that is a very big open question. There was a comment from Sakir the other day that, in fact, the presence of U.S. forces wasn't essential to European security necessarily. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think you can have, it's something of a separate discussion, but I don't think you can simply have this kind of strategic level nuclear deterrence provided by America without having a significant conventional presence in Europe as a tripwire. I don't think it works. But that's not necessarily our subject today. Will the U.S. be supportive of NATO doing more in terms of its Mediterranean partnerships? Yes, I think so. But we have to accept that most of the engagement with Southern partners for the U.S. and others, by the way, in NATO is bilateral. And so there's an interesting question about how much of that could be captured for NATO. How much of it you want to give a NATO hat to, or not? Again, an open question. Finally, a third, just to conclude, I think one of the things that this and other administrations will be very interested in is the whole question of connectivity. Linking north and south, east and west through the Mediterranean, and how you protect all of that infrastructure and the role of the private sector in that, and so on. You can see this in many different ways, even going out to India through IMEC. These are things of real interest, I think, to this administration, but probably to any American administration. And then just a final point, again, linking to this question of the nexus between East and South. You could imagine a future in which there is much less U.S. presence in Europe and European security, but that most of what is here is in the South, is in the Mediterranean. And that will have real implications. So again, thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Ian, for your remarks. I'll come back to a question with a question to you later on this. But let me proceed and introduce our second speaker, who is Ambassador Dr. Mahmoud Karim. Ambassador Karim has been recently appointed as the president of the Egyptian National Council for Human Rights with a ministerial title. So, sir, congratulations on your new appointment. We wish you the best of luck and the best of luck always to Egypt. And Mahmoud is the former Egyptian ambassador to NATO and to the European Union and to Belgium. I hope we can hear from Ambassador Karim his perspectives about regional integration prospects following the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement and the need to harmonize emerging EU and NATO mechanisms in the southern Mediterranean. Dr. Karim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, my dear Ahmed, for this very kind introduction. I wish to begin by thanking our ambassador and great leader, Ambassador Alessandro Minorizzo, for inviting us and for leading this excellent work throughout. I want to really begin by laying the canvas and referring to the terms of reference. What do we really see in our part of the world? Who are the key and main players in this regard? And at the end, how are we going to harness the effort of these key players to the welfare and benefit of the South? And there are four key players, in my opinion. One is the EU, which has launched in October 2025 the Mediterranean Charter for Cooperation with Southern Mediterranean countries. And it spoke about underscoring security, development, border management, illegal immigration, and not limited to North-South Mediterranean, but open cooperation for Gulf, Sub-Saharan, Western Balkans, and Turkey. And this is interesting. However, the first action plan for this charter will be developed in the first quarter of 2026, specifying which countries and stakeholders will lead which initiatives. And I stop here, and I think this is very important, because we need recommendations before this action plan is formulated. And therefore NATO, and I invite NATO Defense College Foundation to work on these initiatives and send them before this action plan is done. In tandem, number two, of course, is the Washington Summit, which appointed the Special Representative and a liaison office in Amman, Jordan. And the third is the Mediterranean Cooperative Charter, launched by the Union for the Mediterranean, which you, Mr. Chairman, headed for many years successfully. And this was put to action commemorating 30 years of the Barcelona process. The framework aims to strengthen complementarity between Mediterranean countries on three pillars: human development, economy, security, and immigration. Noteworthy is the establishment of a Euro-Mediterranean University, which incidentally my country offered to host. And the fourth actually is what we believe is important in this regard is the role of the League of Arab States, a key player. And why is it important? It is important because data compilation is necessary given the fact that large number of the League of Arab States are Mediterranean and were part and parcel of the Mediterranean dialogue successfully for many years. And I remember that for many years, the League of Arab States Department for Humanitarian Assistance sent diplomats to train in the EU Crisis Management and Conflict Situation section of the EEAS, and with the Crisis Response Center, CRC, and also with the Humanitarian Emergency Response Coordination Center. So the question is, how can we emulate these structural models to your neighbors in the South? And once you put in place, in practice, these structural models and complete them, we can upgrade to the integration and mutual cooperation. So therefore, I call for establishing an institutional framework cooperation with the League of Arab States. Luckily, we have a distinguished and a very high official from the Arab States present with us, and we can discuss with this further. However, there are questions. Is NATO diplomacy, public diplomacy, and science for peace projects sufficient to perform these duties? Do we need a higher profile role by NATO Special Representative added to his mandate? How can the Jordan Center become a harbinger or interlocutor between North and South and bridge the gap with ICC in this regard? These are all questions that I put before you. But there are challenges, and I think most of these challenges have been mentioned. One of them is illegal immigration. And there are incidentally solutions. Some of the solutions incidentally came from Italy only a few days ago, which signed with Egypt a partnership program to establish 89 new technical and vocational training centers in 18 applied technology schools in Egypt. They are training specific laborers requested for specific jobs in Italy. If we need doctors, I don't need an anesthesiologist, for example, I need a pediatrician. So this is happening with this Italian Egyptian program. And of course, I always worry when it comes to the integration of the relationship between illegal immigration, the concept of transboundary crime. Nexus to organized crime and terrorism is apparent in this regard. Artificial intelligence is another area that I want to refer to, hybrid threats. On the issue of digital connectivity, let me give another good example of cooperation which NATO and others can build upon, which is the recently launched maritime cable called Africa 2. This, with many European companies, this, for example, is so important because it serves more than 3 billion beneficiaries and will extend along the banks of the Suez Canal and will generate $37 billion to African GDP. So there, when we speak about digital connectivity, there you have an area that you can cooperate with. And I add climate change, which was mentioned. May I add also business and human rights, which is extremely important because Europe has taken good steps in the framework of taxonomy and labor environment performance, which should invite us all to change our national laws and adapt to put into practice better formulations of business and human rights. Water desalination is another much needed area, and energy cooperation, where we in our part of the world enjoy solar and potential wind farms and require, of course, foreign direct investment from the north. And another good example is a huge park in Egypt called the Benban, exporting actually surplus renewable energy to Europe. Now to Gaza. I think it is important to say a few words in this regard. The challenge now is to stabilize the ceasefire and to prevent the violation which may lead to failure. There is close cooperation between 4 key countries under the leadership of the United States. But we need the full implementation of the peace agreement, and we need to enter into the second phase of the plan. And I think President Trump announced today that he will do that even before Christmas, which includes allowing humanitarian assistance into Gaza. In the same time, we need the full implementation of the last UN Security Council resolution, allowing the International Stabilization Force to conduct its duty. We in Egypt are in the process of preparation for the International Conference of Reconstruction and Rehabilitation of Gaza with all the partners, especially in the United States, which will co-chair this conference, which is an integral part of President Trump's peace plan. Now for the operational part. I refer particularly to the training of Palestinian police through EUBAM in Rafah and the auxiliary training that is taking place in Egypt for the same force in our academies. Of course, the UN Security Council has identified 3 machineries in that resolution: Peace, International Stabilization Force, and the Executive Palestinian Committee, which are all transitional till December. Perhaps NATO can consider field hospitals in Gaza. Perhaps NATO can offer assistance in the training of these security forces with assistance with key countries, Jordan and Egypt and so on. And of course, remember, NATO has a wide experience in Afghanistan. I will stop here, Mr. Chairman.
Much, Dr. Karim, for this diversified opening remarks. And I will give the floor now to our third speaker, Dr. Silvia Colombo. Silvia is a senior researcher and faculty advisor at the NATO Defense College. And I hope that we will hear from Dr. Colombo her perspective about NATO's restructuring towards the Southern Neighbourhood, including the strengths and weaknesses of cooperative security based on empirical examples from across the MENA region. Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a big pleasure to be here, and thank you to the NATO Defense College Foundation for this invitation. I will really address the question that was raised at the beginning: to what extent the cooperative security has been successful. And I will speak here, of course, under the control of my colleague Giovanni Romani, because from NATO HQ, because I think that there is an ongoing reflection in NATO that started, as it was mentioned, a couple of years ago at least, with regard to NATO's approach towards its south. And I found the point made by Ian very interesting. Whose south are we talking about? How does Europe look at its south in parallel to what the US is thinking when it comes to its own south and how the two connects. But leaving aside this issue, I will make 3 points regarding what I kind of identify as 3 main shortcomings and possible ways to overcome them when it comes to NATO's engagement with the south. I will tackle the why, so addressing the geopolitical realities, along the title of the panel, shifting priorities. The Middle East beyond the present, I think, encourages us to look a bit towards the future. And here what I want to say is that, of course, NATO has developed a robust framework of engagement with its southern neighborhood. It's based on cooperative security, it's based on the partnerships, the Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. But we can argue that geopolitical realities and shifts have changed dramatically in the past few years. And so, of course, it's difficult to keep pace with that. NATO has tried to do that both in its latest strategic document, the 2022 strategic concept, where the South is mentioned, relatively mentioned, in relation to a multifaceted catalogue of challenges. At the same time, this same document underscores, and it was said, how the focus is on collective security and defense. Of course, there is the issue of terrorism, the second biggest threat, asymmetrical threat to the alliance, that again sheds light on the dynamics in the South. But if we look at 2025, we can say that many things have changed, that the pace of change is something that we are not really able to cope with. If you think, for example, of the Gulf, which has become the sort of center of gravity in this new geopolitical realities, we can talk about multi-alignment, strategic competition, pragmatic cooperation between Iran and some of the Gulf monarchies. Syria was mentioned, which opens a lot of opportunities for regional partners, but also for many European and NATO members. Of course, the need to cope and to develop the ceasefire and work for the reconstruction, not only of Syria, but in particular now of Gaza. But I want just to mention also the southern periphery of Europe, in particular North Africa, which is deeply connected to developments in Africa. And here, these geopolitical realities requires NATO to continue to focus on this region, because we know that the Middle East and North Africa have become increasingly so a terrain for competition by its competitors and adversaries. Both Russia and China are present and are trying to step up their role in these countries. And so this is the why, which I think that NATO has not completely been able to, develop a strategic thinking on the region that takes these new shifting realities into account. The second shortcoming, the second big topic is the what. What are we talking about when we talk about engagement, cooperative security? And here I wanted to refer to the fact that NATO has shifted from a demand-driven approach to an interest-driven approach. But the question is, again, who defines these interests when it comes to the South? And I want to point to two, forms of divergences, both an internal divergence and an internal versus external divergence, i.e. the fact that sometimes we don't share, as NATO or NATO allies, the same priorities as our partners in the region. And I can speak about this also on the basis of what we get from the intense discussions and dialogue we have regularly with our partner countries coming from the Middle East and North Africa who attend our courses, and we try to foster a two-way street, but we understand very well that sometimes there are roadblocks. There are things that are very important to us, but their priorities are different. And of course, they speak a lot about maritime security, about human security, cyber, of course, again, Lebanon, Gaza, and there is very little that we can do about this or that we have done in relation to these challenges. And then there is also an intra-NATO set of political divergences. I mean, I can't speak about that much, but of course the minimum common denominator, the consensus, is a strength of NATO, but at the same time it can be also a constraint to a certain extent. Sometimes tough political discussions are not just happening tout court because there is no appetite to create, of course, divisions within the alliance. So how to move beyond that? I think that that's very important for NATO to think creatively about new ways of engaging its partners in co-designing its policies, its approaches, and to really use political dialogue, because NATO is a defensive political-military alliance. Political dialogue should really be at the forefront and the driving, let's say, factor to in preparation to practical cooperation or technical cooperation, military to military cooperation. And this leads me to the third and final point, which is the how, a shortcoming in the way in which NATO operationalizes its partnerships. Of course, there is a lot of emphasis on technical cooperation, as I mentioned. I mean, there is, again, a full list, the menu for the partners, defense capacity building, individually tailored partnership priorities. I mean, I'm not gonna go into all this because it can be a bit boring. Of course, participation in trainings, joint exercises, sharing of intelligence as much as possible. But we have also to consider the fact that there is a lack of absorption capacity by our partners. Sometimes we flood them with too many initiatives. The EU is doing the same, so there is a risk of duplication. And also the question arises as to what extent NATO has the right tools to address the challenges and opportunities that come from the south. Here again, I can see some positive developments in the sense that the new Southern Neighbourhood Action Plan and the newly mutually agreed document on the joint security priorities between NATO and its allies from the south allow for more flexibility. And so going a bit away and beyond the bureaucratic processes that the partnerships have entailed so far. And also, I think that the great asset that the NATO has and should use to address many of the challenges that have been mentioned also previously, from migration to climate change-related challenges, is, for example, to foster intra-regional cooperation. So not just working bilaterally, NATO and each individual partner, but also NATO and, for example, the Gulf, the region of the ICI, which it's already doing, but also in the Mediterranean, despite all the difficulties, it could try to do more. And then the final point, which I think it's kind of the overarching element, is to invest a lot on strategic communications and how to change the perception of NATO in the region, again, to address this mismatch I was referring to, and to make sure that NATO remains a relevant player in this very complex and but strategic region. Thank you very much. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Colombo. Actually, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, Sylvia. First, which single NATO tool or mechanism has the most untapped potential into MENA region, and what has prevented it from being used effectively so far? This is one question. Mm-hmm. And the other question that I'd like to ask you to address is how can the Amman office, the NATO Amman office, become an integral player in the Euro-Atlantic Mediterranean strategies?
Okay, I mean, thank you for these questions.
We will take like 3-4 minutes all right?
For both.
Okay.
Sure. Well, the first question about the untapped potential of NATO's tools. I mean, I think that NATO is well positioned because it has many tools to use in the region with vis-a-vis its partners. Sometimes what I argue is that these are too many. These are sometimes confusing to our partners. And I want to go back to the point about the political dialogue, which is not in itself a tool, but it is in one way or another. And I think that a lot of emphasis, too much emphasis, is put on the practical military-to-military cooperation, the provision of systems, the interoperability issue, and so on and so forth. But what it's lacking, particularly in the context of shifting priorities on both sides, because the alliance also has reviewed or reoriented its priorities in the past few years, I mean, at least since 2022, is to exploit political dialogue in a more strategic way. Sometimes this political dialogue is not happening because there are, as I said, divergences. It's decided that certain things are too disturbing or too difficult to approach, both within the alliance because of the divisions, but also with our partners, because it seems that they are not ready, to take and shoulder their own responsibilities. I think that what the region, the Middle East, has demonstrated in the past few years, starting from some countries in the Gulf, but I think of Egypt, of course, and other players, is that they are ready and capable of being not only security kind of recipients, but also security providers. We as NATO should foster this process. Of course, it's sometimes there are still only baby steps. For example, to develop a security architecture mechanisms to deal with conflicts or to avoid that conflicts spill over, to deal with emergencies, man-made emergencies, but also natural emergencies and disasters. All these things should be encouraged. And the political dialogue is what allows the two sides really to exchange and to be as much as possible on the same page, not necessarily agreeing on what's happening, the assessment of what's to be done, but on what the two sides can each put on the table in order to achieve some common, not common objectives, but moving in the same direction. I think it was mentioned in the opening remarks that there are no borders to our shared challenges, and so we should really work from NATO's side and the partner side with this vision. And then talking and connecting this to the Amman office, to the Amman liaison office, I think it's a great asset. It's located in a country and in a sub-region, let's say, that really is at the core of the conflicts, but also the potential for mediation and for diplomacy. So, I mean, for NATO, but also opening this opportunity to other players. I think I'm thinking about the EU with the new Pact for the Med that was just announced a couple of months ago, or not even 2 months ago. There could be really great opportunities to foster this mutual dialogue, to address specific issues that are relevant to the region, and to have the creation of a sort of coalition of the willing, let's say, between partners and NATO allies, other international organizations and players to move forward. This Amman office should be regarded as a sort of an office as a space for the entire Mediterranean dialogue countries to be able to work on these shared challenges. And I think that similar to what's happening in Kuwait City with the other NATO regional office, it's important to keep it as open as possible. And so potentially this could also be the basis for really devising a future architecture for security of the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, let me ask you a couple of questions. If you were advising today NATO, what is one practical measure that the United States must or should take into context in the next 12 months to demonstrate real strategic engagement in the Mediterranean, not just rhetoric commitment? This is the first question. And the second question, what would shared burden look like between the US, European allies, and regional partners in the Mediterranean? When we talk about shared burdens among the three partners.
No, absolutely. And if you allow me maybe to take your second question first. I think, in fact, the issue in the Mediterranean on burden sharing, in a practical sense, but also in a broader strategic sense, is a huge test case. Because if you look, for example, at the relationship between NATO and the European Union, and all that could be done, and all the more that would need to be done, especially if we go in the direction of a stronger European pillar in NATO, which I think is both correct and inevitable. Where is this going to be most practical and obvious first? It's going to be in the Mediterranean, where you have this mix of both hard and soft missions and security concerns, where these things actually fit together very, very well. If you look to the east on these very sort of hard and large-scale questions of deterrence and defense vis-a-vis Russia, the EU can supply a lot of resources, money, for investment in defense and innovation, but when it actually comes to doing the business of defense and deterrence, it's a NATO mission, in my view. But in the south, the missions and the capacities are more mixed. And so I can easily see a kind of closer nexus operationally in the south than there might be in other theaters. I think that's very, very important. It would have implications for the United States as well, obviously. The United States has, I would say, under this administration, my own personal observation, has ambivalent but broadly supportive views about NATO. As long as European allies are paying more and doing more and so on. When it comes to the European Union, this is not a priority. I mean, it's very clear in this national security strategy, it was clear anyway, but it's been made very explicit, that this is an administration that sees the world largely through bilateral relations with states, even with individual political personalities, and that multilateral institutions, above all, if I could say the EU and the UN, are further down the list. Let's be polite. On the first question, the NATO perspective in the US, well, I think it is really all about keeping this presence in place to the extent that's practical. It really does matter. If you take just for example, the key issue of integrated air and missile defense, which is a concern for societies all around, north and south in the Mediterranean, and even beyond. Where is this capacity coming from? Most of it is now afloat in the Mediterranean. Most, not all, is American. Much of it is based on defense support relationships, access relationships with countries like Spain and Greece and others. So you can actually keep and Turkey. So you can actually keep the presence in the region. So I think that complex of presence and security relationships will be critical. I think it's in American interest. Administrations may vary on this, but I think certainly it's critical for security viewed from Europe, but also I think from NATO's southern partners.
Thank you very much. Mahmoud, I have a couple of questions also for you. First one is, how can the EU action plans and NATO's Southern Neighbourhood architecture be integrated coherently rather than in parallel? This is the first question. And the second question, in light of the renewed US peace proposals and recent discussions around the post-conflict arrangements in Gaza, do you see any realistic, I mean, you you shed some light on this about the role for NATO in terms of sharing their experiences in hospitals. But I want to explore more and dig deeper into this. Do you see any realistic and clearly defined role for NATO, even a limited one, in stabilizing, monitoring, or humanitarian coordination on the ground? And if yes, where could NATO add value without becoming a political actor in the conflict itself? Can you address these two questions, please, Dr. Karim?
Yes, and
In 4 minutes, please.
yeah, with friends like Ahmed, who needs enemies? Very important questions there. I spoke at the very beginning saying that NATO is not alone with the Southern Mediterranean. And I tried to identify the contenders who are dealing with the same subject, with the same issues, with the same challenges, and perhaps have very similar strategies in dealing with the Southern Mediterranean. And you were heading this organization, and you had your own challenges and worries when you were doing your job as Secretary General. And the question will always remain, what will happen? How can these contenders work together, try to align their concerns, try to perhaps show more cooperative measures amongst themselves in dealing with, perhaps, and I will be very frank, perhaps if we have NATO dealing with the United Nations or dealing particularly with the EU in a certain project in our part of the world, this in itself may become more acceptable to parts and countries of our own region, because there you will have the necessary EU presence, for example. The EU will be there. The EU will have EU BAM on the ground, and they will continue to do a job that they already know. Then they are far ahead of NATO in this regard, because they had boots on the ground and they were controlling the Rafah crossing, Karm Shalom, and so on. And they were doing a good job, and they will return. This is part of the agreement that we have with them, and this will happen perhaps in the second phase. So now is the time for all these contenders to think alike and try to put an action plan before it is too late. And I gave the opportunity. I said the action plan will be done in the first quarter of 2026 by the EU. And I invited NATO and NATO Defense College to capture this opportunity and perhaps send the conclusions from this conference itself to the EU in order to identify how NATO Defense College sees a possible contribution in this regard. And I hope this answered your question. Now, the second on post-conflict. The post-conflict era is extremely important, and now we will see a great deal of concentration by important partners on post-conflict issues. And there is a lot of literature, there is a lot of experience, there is a lot of on-the-ground projects that have done not only in peace building but in peacekeeping. There is a culture of building peace between the partners themselves, and moving away from conflict into cooperation. How can you do that? How can you train the youth, for example? How can you bring the youth together and try to do away with these unfortunate stereotypes that exist on both sides, for example, and no one likes that. Incidentally, when Egypt and Israel started peace in 1970, on the 29th of March 1979, one of the major ideas that happened was bringing youth from Israel into Egypt and bringing youth from Egypt to Israel, so that we can understand each other and understand where we come from. So this is another soft area, if you will, that can happen in this regard, and I think NATO can do a great deal. I did ask for a field hospital, and I think this will send a very positive message to the Palestinians who are distraught, who are completely destroyed, without houses, without hospitals, without food, and so on. And the most important thing is how can we expedite the entry of assistance into Gaza as soon as possible, and perhaps implement the recommendations of the rehabilitation conference that will be championed or called for by Egypt and will be chaired by the United States, in order to put plans, immediate plans for the reconstruction of Gaza in this regard.
So I will open the floor now for a few questions that I'll take from the floor. Can I kindly ask you to present yourself and to who do you address your question, and be short and concise in your questions and go directly to what you aim at. So I'll take 3 questions the first round, and please do tell us to whom do you address your question. Sir, we will start with you, and then the gentleman there. Okay. And then...
Good afternoon. Does it work? Yes. My name is Carlo Trezza. I'm a member of the board of directors of the foundation. My question goes, I think, to Ian Lesser and maybe also to Silvia Colombo. Practically, most of the speakers today have spoken about the 2024 Washington Summit, NATO Summit, and to the 2022 strategic concept in Madrid. But no one has spoken about the Hague summit of this year. And I think rightly so, because the last document achieved at the summit was rather poor. It was just practically a commitment, ironclad commitment to Article 5 of NATO, and the commitment by the Europeans to dedicate high sums of budget to defense. But so, what is the Bible today? I mean, is it the 2 last summits, or do we have to expect probably what is said in the new US strategic concept, which appears today? So maybe we'll have to study that very carefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, would you like to take this?
Yeah, no, thank you, Carlo. Thank you very much. Look, it's actually a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think, there is already some discussion about what might be on the agenda at the Ankara summit coming up in July, I guess it is, June or July. I mean, Turkish interlocutors will tell you that they're particularly interested in hearing about issues of infrastructure protection, counterterrorism, things of this nature that you would imagine. I mean, and so I think if there is an opportunity perhaps to say more about NATO Strategy South, the Ankara Summit, even if it has its controversial aspects, obviously, will be an opportunity to do that. And I think probably Turkey will be keen to make sure that the US is on board with whatever that is. Now, that may mean something that's more minimalist. I don't really know. We'll have to see. But I do think your question points to a broader point, if you like, that it's getting harder and harder, in a sense, to talk about some of these issues of strategy beyond simply spending, with a Washington where it's just raising more and more question marks about commitment. It's not an easy equation. And finally, I think it's an extremely important point in the context of our conversation, because I think one of the things you hear very, very frequently from NATO partners in the South broadly is that, yes, we can talk about the practical things we can do together, but first also tell us about what your strategy is, South. And of course, it's not an easy question to answer.
Silvia, would you like
Briefly,
to
to complement, I totally agree with Ian on this lack of strategy, in the sense that the summit in The Hague was not a very kind of forward-looking or strategic summit in the discussions, in the conclusions. It was meant to test and secure the cohesion of the alliance at a very critical moment. And we are still assessing to what extent this has been successful or not, for example, in the case of support to Ukraine and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the South, it was not discussed. It was not probably even mentioned, or to a very limited extent. So we have to go back to the Washington Summit, and most likely where we developed a roadmap, the Southern Neighbourhood Action Plan. In Ankara, it would be a great moment after 2 years to see to what extent we have delivered and to move from the roadmap to a clear strategy. Usually strategy should come first, but in this case I think that it's never too late to do that, and probably it would something very important to take stock of what's been happened in the past 2 years when it comes to NATO's engagement with the South, and to think ahead in order to have a strategic vision to move forward. But the 2025 strategic summit was not part of this conversation, I think. Thanks.
Thank you. The gentleman.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Eduardo Barca. I'm a research fellow in AI cybersecurity for EPIS think tank. And I would like to ask to Professor Silvia Colombo, but the question is also open for the rest of the board, a question regarding the elimination of social engineering into the 2025 national strategy for the US military. And this aspect, what consequences could have on a NATO aspect into the MENA region, considering the instability provided by cultural and religious attrition factors that could be reinforced with the absence of a common and especially a US-based social engineering strategy. Thank you very much.
Is it clear?
Question, and I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer it. I do, you know, the defense strategy, of course, isn't out yet, but the national security strategy is, you know, and from a European perspective, it's going to be very controversial because there's a lot of discussion in there that strays into kind of civilizational issues explicitly in a way that, you know, are the stuff of social engineering and discourse in the cyberspace. I mean, every day. Maybe this is unavoidable today, but I don't think it makes the problem of coming up with coherent strategies, transatlantic or north-south, any easier.
Do you want to?
No, I don't think I'm ready to engage with this question, but I agree that, I mean, all these aspects are really making things much more difficult, so better to stay on talking about challenges and opportunities instead of, you know, civilizational or identity-based issues.
All right. There's another question there. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Maya Masade. I'm a research assistant at the International Council on Environmental Economics and Development. And I had a general question to the panel, no one specific in mind. But we often speak about the South as if it were a single strategic space, but Gaza, Syria, Libya, and the Gulf reflect very different conflict dynamics and political economies. With that in mind, which elements of NATO's existing tools, including political dialogue, capacity building, cooperative security, do you see as genuinely transferable across these contexts? And where do you see the clearest limits or necessary adaptations when we move from this abstract category of the South to the complex realities on the ground?
Dr. Karim, would you like to take this question?
I really I like the question very much because it reminds me when you mentioned don't treat the South as one homogeneous unit, and we can interpolate that into, you know, IR theory, for example. You know, some people look in terms of most similar systems theory, and others look at, you know, least similar systems theory. What you're cautioning against is extremely important. The South is a unit, but it is different. Don't apply one yardstick to all the countries of the South at the same time with the same parameters and with the same values. No, the South is different. And in the same time, I will give you two blunt examples of how sometimes we mismanage communication with the South on extremely important issues. One of them, illegal immigration. Where is active endeavor in terms of illegal immigration? Can anyone answer this question? Active endeavor has been in existence, is a successful event that takes place. But where is coordination between Southern Mediterranean countries when it comes to active endeavor? Can someone tell me? Where is it? Where is cooperation with the South in terms of search and rescue in order to stop illegal immigration? I spoke of how we can turn illegal immigration into legal immigration. And then there are two blatant examples that I will mention. When we negotiate with the South, in terms of cooperation, for example, and we insist from the North that we need more information on specific issues that we consider in the South harmful for national security, for example. Why would the North be interested in the flow of capital, for example, from South to North? And that has been stopping certain negotiations, stopping cooperations between certain countries. Can someone tell me that? Why is capital flow important for the North to?
Would you like to comment?
And so on and so forth. So I just wanted to, agree with what you said, and perhaps someone can answer the provocative questions that I mentioned.
Annie, would you like to have go on this?
Well, just to say, when it comes to NATO, I think that you're totally right. I mean, we are speaking here about the South or sub-regions as if they were, homogeneous entities and without much differentiation. But actually, NATO is differentiating a lot. Actually, NATO has a strong bilateral approach to the region. I mentioned the individually tailored partnership priorities that are negotiated with specific partners, but not all of them. I mean, it's really out of a bilateral engagement, and this is the result of the demand-driven approach that drove NATO's engagement until recently. I think that if we really want to make a shift towards an interest-based approach, regardless of the difficulty of defining this shared interests, but we need to also develop a sort of sub-regional or regional approach to the Middle East, to North Africa, the links to the Sahel, the Gulf. So I think that what is lacking is really to have this multilateral perspective about what the region represents for NATO beyond the individual paths of cooperation that are already open.
Thank you. I think we are 2 minutes, we will be done in 2 minutes. So I can take just one question, 2 questions. Okay, but can we have them really short? The 2 gentlemen there.
Maurizio Geri, and I am a European Union Marie Curie Fellow. I'm also Pollard of Irini Operation, so I want to ask about the elephant in the room, Russia. So how Russia in the Mediterranean, in particular the Shadow Fleet and all the hybrid warfare, can push NATO in general, I mean US, Turkey and EU, to cooperate and deter this type of hybrid warfare.
All right.
Thank you very much.
And the other question, I think, Ian, you should take this first question if you
Thank you very much. I'm Maurizio Melani. I'm a retired ambassador and teaching international relations. I've been very happy to hear, especially from Ambassador Karim, that the European Union and Europeans have a role to play in the region, in managing conflicts, and all the aspects that we are discussing. There is a tendency in Europe, and particularly in the United States, to bash the European Union. So it's interesting to hear what you have said. I presume that this will be also a point that will be discussed perhaps in the third panel. But I would like to ask if you think that it is important in order to have Europe, the European Union, or the countries of the European Union want to go in this direction, in order to have the European pillar of NATO, to encourage Europe to have its own capabilities, industrial capabilities, and strategic command and control capabilities, and not only buy from the United States. I mean, what is the view about this point? Thank you very much.
Ian?
I mean, on the hybrid question, I mean, of course, it's an important one. It manifests itself in different theaters. I mean, of course, not just the Med, but it does include the Med, and around the Black Sea, especially if we include that as well. You know, I would be concerned as well about really more high-intensity things that can go wrong. Maybe starting as hybrid attacks or responses to hybrid attacks, but the longer the conflict in Ukraine goes on, the prospects, the chances, the collective risk of accumulated risk of something going wrong more directly between NATO and Russia is obviously there. We think first maybe about the Baltics, but it's not just Baltic Sea, but it's not just that. It could be the Black Sea, it could be in the Eastern Mediterranean, it could be in Libya, it could be in a lot of different settings that I think we have to take account of. And so you're right to ask the question. I mean, if I may, just a short comment on the second one, I do think the EU attention to defense investment and innovation and building a new more unified defense industrial market in Europe is extremely important. But I think we need to be clear, in my view anyway, that that's one enormously important contribution. Don't let it displace what NATO can bring to bear, because, you know, let me be telegraphic, the EU together may be better at generating money to spend on defense and defense innovation. But if it comes to interoperability and command and control and all these other things, you know, you have a ready-made institution in the form of NATO. I don't think you should water it down. And I think that's true whether the US is fully present or not.
Mahmoud, very short answer.
On the question on cyber security, I will list some of the institutions that are already available in NATO that can be better put in practice. For example, I spoke, or I will mention Prometheus, a very successful project in Mauritania, for example, that offered civil protection and medical emergencies. Do we need Prometheus in other parts of the South? Yes, we do. Dexter operation also for anti-terrorism, a very successful. Do we need Dexter? Yes, we do. Cyber Defense Center. How can we turn around the outer space activities to predict emergencies in terms of natural disasters that happen in the middle? All these machineries, institutions exist within NATO, and they could be put into practice and work under the title of civil interoperability. They exist. Let's use them. Mr. Ambassador, you're absolutely right when you said, you know, and I think you are more capable than any one of us to see how you can manage through EU across the Atlantic relationship with the United States. But I tell you as an Egyptian that the role of the EU is coming in the Middle East, and it is much wanted because the EU has extensive experience in peacekeeping, in maintaining cooperation and ensuring the longevity of any type of agreement that we achieve.
Indeed, there has to be a pivotal and important role for the EU and NATO in the Mediterranean region. I see lots of appetite for questions, but the time is up. And I would like to thank all of you in the audience for your interaction, and join me in thanking our remarkable panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, we had this first session, and the second one will approach a theme that creates surely debate within the alliance, the so-called 360-degree approach. As you know, the alliance has different priorities. And of course, there has been since, obviously since 2022, a lot of debate and action also around the Ukrainian invasion. This is all good and right. The problem is Russia is not only in the east, it's also in the south. And since long, they have lost Syria with an alliance which, of course, can be long debated, about political correctness or values or rule of law or human rights. But they are very present in other places. So if we judge the world only by Russian presence, well, it's also in the south. But if you take into account that the alliance has an undivided security, which is a fundamental tenet for the alliance, well, then the 360-degree approach is not a nicety, it is essential as Article 5. In fact, it is one of the ways to avoid arriving at an Article 5 if you don't do just crisis management or deterrence, but also crisis prevention. The three fundamental tasks of NATO, as you remember, are defense, deterrence, one, crisis prevention and management, and then cooperative security. And also this third task is part of this 360-degree approach. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to the panel with Matthew Robinson. He's the director of the Euro-Gulf Information Center, but you might not know he's also a Brit from Northern Ireland, so from a divided country, bringing his special experience to the debate. We have Nyagale Bagayoko. She's the chair of the African Security Network from Paris. So we consistently have, a regional approach to regional affairs. We have then Nigar Göksel, the project director of Turkey and Cyprus International Crisis Group. As you know, Turkey is one of the major allies and a very critical one in the Middle East. So it's part and parcel of the total security architecture of the alliance. Dahan Ahmed Mahmoud, he's the executive director of the Maritime Institute for Strategic Studies. And it's interesting to see that a country like Mauritania consistently contributes in a very low-key but very practical way to common endeavors. It's a very good example of good practices and, adequate personnel for international engagements. And finally, let me conclude with Professor Omar Ba from the CEDES de Paris et Sciences Po, coming from Bordeaux. So please, the members of the panel, the floor is yours.
Everyone, and it's my honor to chair this session on the 360-degree approach to the South, security, governance and balance. I would like to pay my thanks to the hosts, the NATO Defense College Foundation, Ambassador Maurizio Rizzo, and Director Alessandro Politi for putting together an excellent afternoon of sessions with a pretty diverse panel and audience. So thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to chair in a presence with such an esteemed audience, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think NATO has made
clear that the southern neighborhood, stretching from North Africa across the Mediterranean to the Arab Gulf, is central to Euro-Atlantic security. This region is a crossroads of trade routes, energy supplies, and digital links. But endless recent threats have reminded us that instability here can ripple back to us in Fortress Europe. When we speak about the South today, it's worth recalling how much this concept has evolved in NATO and European thinking. During the Cold War, strategic attention was often framed in terms of flanks and great power rivalry in the Mediterranean. In the 90s and early 2000s, the focus shifted towards crisis management in the Balkans, then to stabilization efforts in Afghanistan and counterterrorism in the wider Middle East. And more recently, the Arab uprisings and collapse of state structures in parts of the Sahel and renewed competition in the Mediterranean, and the growing role, of course, of Gulf actors in African economies have all fused into a single strategic picture. The South is no longer in a distant periphery. It is a dynamic space where Africa, Europe, and the Arab Gulf are increasingly intersect. Of course, in Washington last year, NATO leaders reaffirmed the need for a truly comprehensive approach to the South. This means not only defense and crisis response, but also supporting good governance and sustainable development. It means partnering closer with regional actors and external players alike. In April of this year, for example, NATO held meetings with the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, Gulf partners like Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE to discuss shared security challenges in the Sahel and the Gulf. This underscores that events in the Arab Gulf have direct implications for our collective security. Similarly, here in the EU, new MENA initiatives have been launched, reflecting how closely NATO and EU interests overlap. We all know that no single country, organization can tackle these challenges alone. A 360-degree approach means linking military, civilian, and developmental efforts together. This means engagement with all relevant partners, local governments, the African Union, sub-regional bodies, the EU, and the Gulf states, who have growing stakes in Africa. Each of our panel will shed a light on these issues from different angles, and I look forward during the course of the session, I think we'll hear about emergency security dynamics in Africa, regional security trends and external powers, stability efforts in North Africa, security in the Sahel and its impact on NATO. Together with this expertise, hopefully it'll help us understand how the threats, whether it's in the Sahel or the Maghreb, and the influence of extra-regional actors ultimately affect NATO and Europe. I look forward to open and frank discussion and ample time, of course, for questions and answers from our audience here. I think our panel brings a field of experience and academic insight. As Alessandro Politi mentioned before, we have a panel of Dr. Nigel Bagatto, chair of the African Security Sector Network in Paris, political scientist specializing in African security and development. She has conducted extensive field research on security systems in Francophone Africa and taught at Sciences Po. She's headed the peacekeeping and peacebuilding program at the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, and now leads ASN research on security sector governance. Nigar Göksel, project director, Turkey-Cyprus International Crisis Group, has over 25 years of experience on Turkish and regional security issues, has directed ICG's Turkey-Cyprus program in Istanbul, analyzing conflicts from Eastern Mediterranean to the Caucasus, and of course previously was editor-in-chief of the Turkish Policy Quarterly. Dahan Ahmed Mahmoud, Executive Director of the Mauritanian's Institute for Strategic Studies, a veteran Mauritanian diplomat and scholar, has served as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Islamic Affairs, and now leads the country's Strategic Studies Institute. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Omar Ba, professor Centre Études Diplomatiques et Stratégiques Paris and Sciences Po Bordeaux. He has worked on UN Special Mission programs in Central Africa and served as African Union election observer. His research covers foreign policy, security and development in Africa. So that gives you a little sample of our esteemed panel. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Nagalia Bagyoto for the first remarks. The floor is yours.
Yoko.
Apologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk to you about the Sahel and the West African region and about the situation today, but also in the past decade. I think that there is a need to realize that what has been experienced by external partners, in particular by European ones and France in particular, but also the European Union as such, has been what a very famous French anthropologist has called a revenge of the context. This anthropologist is called Jean-Pierre Olivier de Cerdan. It's very important to realize that almost everywhere in the world, and not only in the Sahel region, external intervention has been failing, and it is worsening. Because what we have seen in the Sahel region is in fact very similar to what happened previously in Afghanistan or to what happened in Syria. And maybe, I think, if we go back to longer history, to what is continuously happening in the so-called global south since the Vietnam War, in fact. And in essence, I think that today there is a dire need to urgently change the lens through which we look at southern partners. And this is particularly true for the Sahel region. I definitely think that there is a dire need today to find new methodologies to analyze what is at stake today, which is completely different to what external partners are in fact projecting on their southern partners. The perspective which has been developed to stabilize, and I think that the word and the concept more broadly of stabilization has been completely misleading, and that there has been lots of misunderstanding to what was to be put under such a label of stabilization. I think that today there is a need to bring back historical studies, sociological studies, anthropological studies, of course, to get a better sense of geopolitical dynamic. Without a thorough knowledge of local dynamics, of local environments, there is a poor chance that the so-called strategic dialogue that has been called during the first session could really be developed in an efficient way. I think that forging new approaches would, for instance, enable to look at the three major trends which have been characterizing the Sahel region and which in fact have been completely overlooked by foreign partners, which are more often than not completely focused only on the so-called war on terror in the region. Whilst I think the situation was much more complex. So the three core dynamics, I think, that should be under scrutiny are the following ones. First, of course, you do have religion, but religion is definitely not only about jihadism. Of course, in the Sahel region, you have jihadism. But first, there is a need to understand that the different jihadi insurgencies, because what is at stake are insurgencies, are in fact competing one to each other, and it is a case of jihadi groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda opposed to those affiliated to the Islamic States, which are in fact also referring to local community disputes, which also have to be well understood. But you also have political Islam in this region, and it's been a major force, be it in Niger, be it in Mali, the role of political Islam, the Islamization of society itself is a major trend and a reality which has to be taken as such and which has to be sought. But there is also a need not to forget that you do have multi-confessional states in the region as well. For instance, Burkina Faso, and in those regions, and in a country such as Burkina Faso, you have actors, for instance, new evangelic churches who could also, in the forthcoming years, become serious threats to security. The second major trend, of course, is praetorianism and militarism. We all saw that there has been coups in the region. But in fact, there is a need to realize that militarism is the common regime which has been dominating the region since the independence, and that the exception has been democracy, and then not the opposite. That's very important. And finally, the last trend is nationalism, which is labeled in the region as neo-Pan-Africanism. And what is neo-Pan-Africanism? It is simply the local African expression of the wave of nationalism, of patriotism, of sovereigntism, which is overwhelming all the world today, and which, in fact, has been appearing more than 10 years ago, and which has been completely ignored. So I think there is a need to understand that maybe stability in the region will come via the alliance between those three forces, maybe conservative religion, second militarism, third nationalism, which could bring a form of stability based on authoritarianism and on conservatism rather than on liberal democratic norms and standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that interesting perspective. Your thoughts on nationalism in the African continent are particularly interesting. Obviously, we focus so much here on naval gaze here in Europe, and we look at it as a force for division. So your perspective is quite. It's exactly the same kind of nationalism. It's a fascinating perspective. Thank you so much for your expertise. I'm keen to keep make pace and move over to our next speaker. Nigar Goksol, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
I'm going to talk about the rapid flux in the security landscape and the new interplays between regional actors, so that would including Turkey, the Gulf countries, Israel, Egypt, possibly others, and how their interplay is shaping the security ecosystem. I'm going to have to cut corners, of course, because 7 minutes is not enough for the complexity. But I'm going to try to give examples that illustrate both that these alignments are shifting very quickly. That's what's the most sort of distinct feature, how disorientingly quick alignments are changing, how cross-regional they are. I mean, of course, Turkey sits in between the NATO South and East and is always straddling the different regions, but it's not only Turkey who's acting quite cross-regionally. And also, I'll end with sort of saying that the leverages of the different regional actors are complementary, and to the degree that they can collaborate, stability will be much more in reach. But then one has to sort of look per conflict, because per case, per conflict, I think there are some different dynamics. So I'll start with Syria. In Syria, one would have once imagined that you'd have UN blue helmets and sort of Western advisors to discuss governance structures. But unlike then, the security assistance, the public service, capacity building, and much of the money is coming from regional players. That said, the United States is playing very critical roles. It maintains a deterrence posture in the Northeast. It uses its diplomatic leverage to push for essential conversations. And of course, Western conditionality is still at play, because Damascus is expected to carry out some improvements for the sanctions to be lifted. So the West is not, I'm not saying the West isn't there. Certainly the US is there, but other regional actors are quite in the mix. And when you look at the roles that they're playing, it's different. I mean, Turkey's engagement in Syria for a long time was driven primarily by hard power, sort of to prevent missiles and militants and refugees from flowing in. But where we are right now, really to stabilize Syria, the involvement of Gulf actors is also very essential and very much in Turkey's interest when you think about Turkey's interest in a stable Syria. So there you see a shared interest, but you also see regional actors that are worried about Turkey's sort of ascendance, having too much influence in Syria, particularly with Iran and Russia out of the scene for now. Then further away from its borders in, for example, Africa, you see that Turkey's engagements are shaped a little bit more by economic interests, but they're also very fused with security. Turkey might enter for investment contracts, infrastructure contracts, or markets, or other commercial opportunities, selling drones. But then to protect investments, it becomes more of a security actor, or it'll get into a scene with military support to the regime, and that'll enable it to Turkey's contractors to get better deals, or selling drones is creates both a security dependence and also is a money-making venture. So they're very intertwined. And one feature that one of my colleagues refers to as adultery of partnerships is also visible, where in Turkey in 2009, when it intervened into Syria, it was triggered a sharp pushback from UAE and Egypt. But by now, after partially normalizing its relations with these two countries, you see that Turkey is engaging very much with the east of Libya, with Haftar as well, so much so that Egypt seems apparently concerned of Turkey having too much of a presence there. But then you look south to Sudan, and there Turkey and Egypt are more in support of the same side, the Sudanese armed forces, and the UAE seems to be supporting RSF. So my point is that there's a sort of pragmatic flexibility where there's cooperation in one arena and then rivalry in another. cognizant of the time as it's running out. So, I mean, I'll say a few things about external actors as well. I think the United States remains a very primary security actor, certainly for the Gulf countries as well as for Turkey. I was looking at the statistics, and of the 28 Gulf-mediated efforts last year, 16 of them at some point involved the United States, either providing diplomatic weight or enforcement capacity. And for Turkey as well, the US has decisive roles across the Levant, the Caucasus, the Black Sea, the theaters that are most important for Ankara's security. My last substantive point concerns Russia. For years, Moscow held a constant pressure lever over Turkey by deciding whether and when the Assad regime would advance on civilian areas south of Idlib. And any such offensive would have pushed hundreds of thousands of refugees towards Turkey's border, a major security and political threat. That's gone today, but today there are growing concerns that once the Ukraine war ends, Russia may redirect attention to the Levant and North Africa. And there are concerns in Turkey that Israel may see value in Russia balancing against Turkey's rising influence in certain arenas. And of course, Turkey's closure of the straits to naval passage did reduce Russia's maneuver ability in and out of the Black Sea, but that's also going to be lifted when the war ends. And I'll end with three very short forward-looking reflections. One is, it seems to me that how regional actors interact will depend enormously on whether major powers are actively involved and how the major powers, big powers, interact with each other. Secondly, I think regional stability will also depend on how much mid-sized actors in the region are working at cross purposes versus finding ways to complement each other. I see Minister Fidan, actually the Turkish Foreign Minister, making efforts to signal that Turkey doesn't intend to cross Arab red lines, and they sort of talk about shared gains and shared responsibilities. And I think it's going to be volatile because the area is very crowded, but it's an important dimension. And finally, as the number of conflicts that these regional actors are involved in expands, we observe that their institutional capacity is sometimes falling short, where the expertise in the bureaucracy and the analytical ecosystem isn't necessarily catching up with the prowess of diplomacy and security roles. And of course, for Turkey, there's also the additional constraints of economic resource deficiencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think in particular your remarks about Russia as to its attention post any end of a Ukraine conflict is an interesting one, especially with your speculation. I might set its sights towards the Levant. We all hope that the conflict in Ukraine comes to an end soon, but we'll, I'm sure, be faced with a host of new challenges to our south. With that, we continue with progress with our speakers, and I give the floor to Dahan Ahmed Mahmoud. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, let me begin with a truth often avoided in this formal discussion. The Maghreb and the Sahel are tired of being NATO's crisis backyard. For decades, we have been analyzed, mapped, problemized, yet seldom consulted. We are expected to absorb shocks, absorb migration flows, absorb instability, while NATO mainly views us through the prism of risk for Europe. But a 360-degree approach requires a shift in perspective. You have to stop observing the South through a lens from Brussels and begin understanding us not as an area, a problem area, but as a constellation of strategic decision-making centers. I speak from Mauritania, a stable democracy at the crossroad of the Maghreb and the Sahel and the Atlantic, and a committed partner in the NATO Mediterranean dialogue since 1995. For us, the South is not a concept. It is our immediate reality. And this reality is changing. The deterioration of security in the Sahel is not only the result of armed groups, it reflects governance gaps aggravated by external strategies that did not match local political dynamics. The end of Operation Barkhane, the expulsion of the French forces, the shift toward Russia and the others are not geopolitical moves. They are a referendum on the dissatisfaction with how European partners have operated. These shifts express deeper frustration with European partnerships, the way European partnerships have been conducted. If NATO wants credibility, it must acknowledge this. Because insecurity in our region is political, social, economic, and environmental. And let me be direct. Security in the Sahel and in this region without governance is a mirage. Training armies while social contracts erode is not state building. Stabilization without dignity freezes conflict. It doesn't solve it. For Mauritania, stability in the Sahel is a matter of national responsibility and national survival. That is why we see potential for deeper cooperation with NATO, but only if this cooperation is co-designed, not imposed. To really make the 360-degree approach work, 3 shifts are essential. The first is co-design, not consultation. The second is strengthen governance resilience and recognize shared responsibility. The governance fragilities in our region are real, but they are not solely the product of local systems. Some external actors, including European commercial and security actors, have often amplified distortion, fed opaque networks, or incentivized practice that undermine institutions. A credible partnership must acknowledge this. The support we need is one that tackles corruption, strengthens state capacity, transparency, economic inclusion, and climate resilience without paternalism or double standard. And the third shift is to treat the South as a strategic actor. Countries in the Maghreb and the Sahel choose their partners based on sovereignty, respect, and practical result. Whether those partners are Europe, Russia, China, Turkey, or else. You have to integrate in your analysis that the South is not solely a place where others come to play. We have our own strategies and our own priorities. Just 2 last points. The first one is if Europe wants to strengthen its pillars within NATO, this is good for us. But it has to be with a change of behavior towards the South. A stronger Europe repeating old pattern will fail. A stronger Europe willing to listen can reshape the relationship. The second point is the security of Europe is linked to the security of Africa. The security of the Maghreb is linked to the security of the Sahel, and the Sahel security is linked to Europe. So you have to build your security, the security vis-à-vis the South, not against the South, but with the South. That is what we ask, and thank you.
Thank you very much, and I must say that your phrasing at the outset was quite poetic. A constellation of strategic decision making centers, very well put. I'm keen to keep making progress on time as we're slightly behind. So with that, I will take us to our final speaker, last but certainly not least, Dr. Omar Abba. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to join my congratulations to the organizers of this high-level conference. I'm coming from Senegal. I'm Senegalese, West Africa, and they asked me to talk and to discuss about the topic deals on the Sahel and Africa effects and link with the NATO's security. And for that, I want to emphasize that Sahel is a part of Africa, and it's a kind of horizontal land coming from Mauritania, the north of Senegal, up to the Horn of Africa. Yes, in Sudan and some other countries. Yes. But its characteristic, its main characteristic is that in Sahel we have a resurgence of coup d'etats, and also mixed with a kind of terrorism and an infra-etatic act. These infra-etatic actors contest the legitimacy and the legality of authorities and governments. And also they fragilize also the dynamic of cultural actors and leaders, religious. And we have a kind of spectrum of contestation by using violence, private violence, against civilians, against soldiers, and the forces of the states. In the other way, I noted that this kind of rising of coup d'etats induce a consequence, and this consequence is the disintegration of ECOWAS. It was the main REX, mean that the regional economic community in West Africa. And this disintegration induced also a rising of a new confederation of states, the three main states, means Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And they called it the Alliance of the Liptako Gourma, and in the Confederation of des États du Sahel, the Confederation of the Sahel states. And if we make a link about the three dimensions I mentioned, we see that we have a kind of fragilization of integration on the one part, and also we have a fed of liberal model of democratization in the other part. And we have also another complexity which coming and destabilize the African governance architecture and also the African peace and security architecture, because we have great powers which are trying to monopolize this kind of conflictuality intra-African, and they try to polarize it on their high level and multi-level competition of influence in the global power. It has another consequence for me. It's that Africa have a link in Sahel regions, and we have also the African Union, which have its provisions. And if you looked about or through the Articles 25 and Article 30 of the African Act of African Union, the Act of African Union, we notice that we have two consequences. If we make a coup d'etat in a country, it will be automatically sanctioned. And this country doesn't have any possibility to vote or to participate on the deliberation of the continental institution. And by the way, it's make a kind of blockage of the capabilities of our continental organization to discuss and to desescalate the political crisis in the Sahel region. And by the way, also, we notice that NATO tried to get and to build a strong partnership with African Union to stabilize the continent, to strengthen peace and security in Africa. In 2014, they raised and they signed a protocol d'accord which permit to help Africa, mainly the Department of Peace and Security, under the leadership of the former commissioner, His Excellency Ismail Shargi of Algeria, to support and to strengthen the monitoring of soldiers in benefit of the standby force of Africa, la Force Africaine en Attente. But in 2005 to 2006, NATO helped also Africa in his polarization of its transportation in a logistic way to help the materialization of its decision to project its military soldiers in the Sudan crisis in Darfur. It was very, very important to underline that. But the intervention of NATO in 2011 in Libya, it was very controversial in terms of the extrapolation of the resolution 1973 of UN Security Council. And since this period, it has a kind of misunderstanding about among Africa and many countries in Africa and NATO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I echo that. I think here in Europe and across the NATO alliances, there is somewhat of a misunderstanding of Africa from its former, ironically, from its former colonial powers. There's a deep misunderstanding. I think you're seeing Europe failing to capitalize potentially on some partnerships in the continent, and China is taking advantage of those missteps day in, day out. So thank you so much for that interesting set of remarks. With that, now we have ample time. We started a little late, so I'm keen to try and make up for some lost time. So we have some time for some remarks, some questions from the audience. I'll kick things off using chair's privilege with one question only. I promise. So on the thematic of the discussion today, we're talking about a 360-degree approach to the South. But in practice, of course, resources and political attention quite often is a finite thing. If you had to advise NATO and its partners, and this goes to the whole panel, if you had to advise NATO and its partners to drop one habit or assumption that is holding them back about the South, whether it's North Africa, the Sahel, Maghreb, the Gulf, and double down on one underused tool or partnership, what would that be, or those be, and why? And that goes to the whole panel. Who would like to jump in first? Would you?
I think we are all agreeing that there is a need to change the way in which NATO is looking at those countries, that there are lots of misunderstanding, because I think that security is framed under concepts which are completely misleading to be efficient in such environment. So that's true that we are all more or less researchers, so that's easy to say that yes, there is a need for more research, but I'm sure that there is a need to develop new ways to understand what is at stake, because what is seen as a major threat for Europe or NATO countries more broadly is not necessarily what is seen as a threat for the partner countries themselves, but in fact not even for Europe itself. If I take the example of terrorism, which has been presented as a major threat coming from the Sahel region, in fact there has only been a single attack which was an attempt at bombing a shop in Paris, and the driver did not die and claimed allegiance to the Islamic State. But that's the only example in more than 15 years. And if you listen carefully at what, for instance, Al-Qaeda leaders, the more famous one, Yada Ghali, is saying, is always been saying that our target is definitely not Europe. It is local leaders and their allies on the Malian soil. So that's important as a message. But when you listen the way in which European partners are presenting the situation in the Sahel, it's a completely different picture.
Thank you so much. Would any, please?
It's a difficult question. I mean, I viewed from Ankara. On the one hand, there's a perception of having been left alone with threats from the south, but there's also a wish to pursue independent policies in the south, and it's really hard to foresee alignment in any near future between Turkey and other, I mean, also among other NATO allies as well. I mean, I just would have to do some escapism and say, more dialogue to try to find the shared interests within among NATO allies, and also taking more into consideration, listening more to the partners on the ground about past mistakes.
Plenty of past mistakes. Please.
I think that the first thing to do is just to change the chip, because the Europeans, they go there, they say, we have to fight the Islamists, the religious people, and this is for our security, and they don't care about the people inside. I tell you, I am from the region, I live there. The problem, and we didn't call the French. And we are the only one who was could help himself and get rid of terrorism. The problem, you have to design the strategies with the people of the region. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Another idea is not to think about the Sahel and the Maghreb as a place where big powers come to play and fight, and you have to ask what the people in place. I said the expulsion of the French from the region was quite like a referendum for on the way they were behaving, and they did very good job against those Islamist terrorists using the Huntington strategies and ideas. It's not that. We have a lot of problem, and the other one is the Europeans. They are the one very close to us, and their security depends on ours. They have to try to, and they say, well, they are corrupted. The corruption, most of it comes from here. When you have a European company that want to build something in Mali or in my country, and they say they are going to give under the table this to the minister or to the director to get the contract, and after, this is not helpful. So please design with us your security, and you will have your security and we'll have ours. That is what I say.
Thank you. Dr. Ba.
Thank you very much. I want to tell that I'm fully agree with my colleagues, but I want to emphasize three things. The first one is the principle of sovereignty of our state. It's non-negotiable. Yes, it's in accordance with the provisions of Article 2, alineas 3 and 4 of the UN Charter. And by the way, it's the main pillar of African Union organizations, which was the previous organizations which succeeded by African Union, this current African Union. And the second point is that the question of security, stability, and peace of Africa comes before anything on the responsibility of African leaders, democratic elected, and of African organizations. But we know that they don't get sometimes the capabilities, financial and logistical and informations and satellites and drones and materials to fight efficiently terrorism and threats in their regions and in their states. But it isn't a reason to develop a kind of superiority of matrix in a geopolitical space and try to mix to get an immixtion and a destabilization of our countries. It's valuable to NATO and also to the other actors, great powers. We aspired that Africa will be developed by Africans, first of all, in a partnership, an equal partnership with foreign actors. The last one is that it isn't possible to get stability in Africa and development when we try to destabilize the situation more and more because this regime is an illegal regime, and the other one who make also coup d'etat is a good one. I think the double standards isn't good in the perception of the collective Africans. It isn't a question of elitism or of political leaders. It's a question of the deep aspiration of Africans to become more responsible and to take into care their own responsibilities and security.
Thank you so much, and I do think that double standard is prevalent amongst certainly how we view the region and that continent. So I appreciate your remarks. With that, I'm keen to bring in some questions from our audience. Per the previous panel, if you could please state your name and your organization. I'll bunch it in a couple of questions. I'll afford the first question to my predecessor who chaired the previous panel. Floor is yours for a question. I think one's coming to you right now.
Thank you very much. Well, I have just one question to Nigar Göksel. Am I pronouncing it right? Okay. So, being a NATO member state, yet very much rooted had a lot of contacts in the Middle East, culturally, economically, politically, what is the driving force in Turkish policy? Is it actually driven mainly by pragmatic interests, or does Turkey have a real and long-term policy or vision for the region? And if it was the second, what is that vision is?
Thank you very much, and I'll take one short second. Please, sir, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Pietro Scuricini, former defensor responsible for cooperation with African countries. Just a curiosity, sorry for saying this, to Professor Ba. You mentioned Article 30 of the African Union Act that can provide suspension to one country. My curiosity is who has to decide this suspension, because this kind of act doesn't exist in the NATO, in the Atlantic Treaty. Who has the power to decide without creating a crisis inside the African Union? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think so. Starting with the first question, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, of course, a book could be written about it. I mean, I think Turkey is trying to maximize its position in multiple regions, sort of, and taking into account that it's not only geography, but it's also its identity straddles both Eurasia and the Middle East and Europe, and trying to turn that into an advantage as opposed to trying to be only one or the other, having to choose one or the other. I mean, in general, I think Turkey is also, perhaps even ahead of the curve, started aspiring for more strategic autonomy, but is doing it more calculatively and more measuredly now. I mean, there were times when I think it went out on an edge, a little ledge, and then recalibrated afterwards. So there's some improvisions and corrections along the way, but I think the direction is both with defense industry development and connectivity projects becoming a more important strategic actor that doesn't rely on one particular camp. That said, I think NATO there's no discussion about the importance of NATO in Turkey as the sort of the best in the world, and Turkey's never going to. My view, never is a strong word, but I think it gives a lot of importance to its NATO membership and sees that also as an asset in its roles in other regions. So I don't want to go on too long, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ba, would you like to jump
Yes.
into the second
Yes.
question?
Thank you for your question. Yes, the disposition, we have two articles in the of the African Union Act. There we have the Article 25, which give the responsibility to the head of state, the Conference of the States, in an ordinary or extraordinary conference to act the eruption of unconstitutional change of regimes. And by the way, in their arsenal, in the dispositive of the mechanisms, they have the possibilities, it's automatic, to block the regular participation of the state member in the vote and the deliberations of the continent. And the Article 30 permit to take other measures in terms of sanctions, economic, political, logistic, diplomatic, and so on, in the free appreciation on the free appreciations of the leadership of the African Union Commission. And the first personality is the president of the commission who execute the decisions of head of states. But in CEDEAO, ECOWAS also, we have the same mechanism in ECOWAS according to the protocol on democracy and elections. But these measures can to be the organizations, African Union and ECOWAS or REX or other regional organization have the responsibility and the duty to inform the Security Council according to the Article 54 of the UN Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would have loved to had the opportunity to bring in more questions, but we're at our hour, unfortunately. So I would like to thank the panel for their insights and their expertise. I think that collectively, I think the panel have emphasized that I think no one actor in the South, whether it be NATO, any single government, external power, can manage our strategic, economic, military security challenges alone. And perhaps it's time for Europe and certain aspects of the NATO alliance to rethink maybe some of its outdated perceptions of the region. I think that's been quite eloquently put by this panel. So I'd like to thank you for your time, for your thoughts, and a round of applause, please, for the panel. Thank you very much. Thanks. Sorry about you.
And so we are now preparing for the third panel, towards a credible European pillar within NATO, capabilities for the three core tasks, which I mentioned already before. We will have as a chair Terry Schulz, then Giovanni Romani from NATO, Morgan Butjens from the DG MENA, EU, Katarina Zidlo, senior policy analyst from the EU ISS, and Lina Khatib from the Extrac. Please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much to all of you who have stuck with us through to the final panel. I'm positive it's going to be worth it. A lot of pressure there on my panelists. As Alexander mentioned, my name is Carrie Schultz. I'm a journalist in Brussels, who's been covering NATO and the European Union for more than 15 years. So I know a thing or two, but I'm hoping to learn a thing or two more from this panel. They've already been introduced, but I'll go again. Lina Khatib there on the end. Giovanni Romani, the only NATO official here as a panelist, he's pointed out himself. Katarzyna Szydło joining us online. You will see her in a moment. And Morgan Boutien from the European Commission here on my right. So as you've just heard, the topic that we're going to be addressing is toward a credible European pillar in NATO, capabilities for the three core tasks, but of course in keeping with the theme of the conference, through the lens of NATO's Southern Neighbourhood. Yeah, I know it's going in and out. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Once again, you know the three core tasks of NATO: deterrence and defense, crisis prevention and management, and of course, cooperative security. And you could say that the Southern Neighbourhood encapsulates all of these problems and challenges at the same time. And I'm very much hoping that we're going to also hear in this panel opportunities for improvement, some strategic imagination, as Ahmed Massadeh said earlier. And I personally am going to make sure that we take a lot of questions from the audience to reward everyone who's still here, because everyone has said they're going to, and we run out of time because everything is so fascinating. We just keep talking about it. Okay, Giovanni, you're going to get the first slot here. A lot of pressure. You've heard a lot of things, and I'm sure that you've been taking notes and you're going to address them. As everyone knows, they each get 7 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion with the panelists. I will really try to keep my questions very short and really want to have a discussion with the audience, and I know that my panelists do as well. All right, Giovanni.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Terry, for chairing this session, but also to Ambassador Miturizzo and to Alessandro Politi and their team for organizing this event. So it's really a pleasure for me to participate to this discussion. It's always timely, as some of the previous speakers said, to have this chat about the South. It's paramount to the Euro-Atlantic region. It's timely also because the US security strategy just came out. But also for me, personally, an opportunity to hear and get some suggestions, as has happened already in the previous panels. But let me lay out some of the background context about NATO's approach to the Southern Neighbourhood, which is a renewed approach, as you've already heard. So, first of all, from a NATO perspective, security is global. There's no such a thing as a siloed regional security. And the security challenges are not only growing in complexity, but they're also increasingly interconnected. So we can talk about Russia's usage of Iran drones against Ukraine, the Houthis' disturbance to global trade, the war in Ukraine and how it caused increases in food and fuel prices in Middle East and Africa, or how the fall of the Assad regime in Syria was partially enabled by Moscow's focus on its war on aggression against Ukraine, and also the weakening of Iran proxies in the region. At the same time, the Southern Neighbor is an area of fierce strategic competition. So actors such as Russia, Iran, to some extent the PRC, are increasingly positioning themselves as alternatives to the West, and in some cases destabilize regional and global security. So it's a domino-like system, and you've already heard about the 360 degrees approach to security, and the partners, and there are 12 for NATO in the southern flank, are our first line of defense. So for NATO to support our partners is a way to strengthen our own security. At the same time, it's not only a challenge because the Southern Neighborhood provides opportunities for cooperation on issues of mutual interest. And many of NATO partners, let me underline this, are active security providers. They have contributed, they continue to contribute to regional security. They help us with situational awareness, and they participate into operations, missions, and activities. Now, in accordance with the core task of NATO, cooperative security, our goal is to foster greater security and stability in the region in areas where NATO has an expertise and can provide an added value. So this can go from interoperability, defense and security capacity building, because mostly what we're talking about is team up, partner with our partners to work together. Now, when you heard talk about the Southern Neighborhood Action Plan, is not a strategy, it is an action plan. It was approved at Washington Summit, as you heard, together with the appointment of Javier Colomina as the first special representative for the Southern Neighborhood. But let me give you some elements about this plan, because you heard about it, and I would like to tell you what it says. And we are now in the second year of implementation of the action plan. So it's essentially on 4 pillars. The first one focuses on political dialogue at all levels. So it's about consulting more with our partners. It's about listening harder and engaging more. So we had the Secretary General who visited Iraq early this year. The Special Representative has had multiple visits, which never stops. He's currently on his way to Qatar for the Doha Forum. And we're meeting partners at all levels. We had a South-focused session with the King of Jordan at the Foreign Ministerial in December last year. And we have regular North Atlantic Council meetings with our southern partners. The last one was last week, to give you an idea. And we have recently also endorsed the agenda for tackling shared security challenges, which was negotiated together with our partners. And it sets priority areas for mutual benefit. We've been pushed in the direction of having thematic dialogues, trying to break down also the barriers of the partnership programs that we have. And we hope this will move more and more towards flexible formats to the development of concrete flagship projects. So the first kind of element is the dialogue. The second element is to step up our game in terms of practical cooperation, focusing on what we do best. Don't see NATO as a Swiss knife, it isn't. NATO has a DNA which is about defense and security, intelligence. We can venture into maybe other areas, but there's always a security element connected to this. So basically, we can certainly bring a contribution effective on capacity building, training, and education, other areas which are in our DNA. And indeed, the South is very heterogeneous. And that is why we have individually tailored partnership programs, which is kind of a contract between NATO and the individual partners, which sets strategic objectives, which are interest-driven, and partnership goals. Of course, it's your mutual interest. It's where the interest of NATO kind of overlaps with the interest of the partner. So basically, we are deploying defense capacity building packages for 4 countries in the South. They are Jordan, Mauritania, Tunisia, and Iraq. And to answer the question that was asked before, DCB, defense capacity building, is probably the most ambitious instrument that we have to support our partners. And beyond the current commitments, we are also trying to explore triangular cooperation, because in some areas it's difficult for NATO to intervene directly, but we can do this through our partners, through international organizations. That's what we mean with triangular cooperation. The third element of the action plan is about presence and visibility. So we have established a NATO liaison office in Jordan in September. Let me stress that it's not a regional office. It is the bilateral office between NATO and Jordan. This complements already what we have in Kuwait, which is an education and training center, and the NATO mission in Iraq. And we also have a military mission at the African Union in Addis Ababa. The presence and visibility is, let me tell you, frankly, is one of the weak points of NATO, because we actually, beyond what I just described to you, we don't have a presence, contrary, for example, to the European Union, which is very present in the territory. The fourth pillar is about deepening our synergies with other international and regional organizations. Certainly European Union, certainly the United Nations, but also African Union and the 2 that are represented here, like the League of Arab States and the Gulf Cooperation Council, which are for us a key partner. We don't want to act in isolation. We want to do this together with our international organization. Let me stress, since this panel is mostly about this, how the European Union in particular is an essential partner for NATO with so many members in common. Our cooperation has expanded steadily, and we are committed to remaining complementary in their initiatives. And I'm sure Morgan Butians will expand a little bit also on the Pact for the Mediterranean. We just had actually a meeting between NATO allies and the leadership of DG MENA and the Eastern Action Service. So and to conclude, this action plan is complementary to the existing NATO partnerships. So we had 30 years of the Mediterranean dialogue, 20 years of the ICI with the Gulf partners, and in addition to this framework, of course, NATO mission in Iraq, a very successful non-combat advisory and capacity building mission, which has helped Iraq in stabilizing its country, fighting terrorism, and preventing the returns of ISIS and Daesh. So basically, our approach with partners is about local ownership, joint identification of areas of cooperation, and focus on what we do best, focus on where we can add value. This is always with the partner on the driving seat, and always upon request of the partner, as it is the case for the NATO mission in Iraq. And we will get out of Iraq tomorrow if the Iraqi government would ask us to end the mission. So with this, thank you for giving me a chance to present where we stand as NATO, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
I don't think my mic is working. Oh, it is now? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And I did, as the only NATO official here, I did give you a little extra time, kindly. Morgan, that was a good lead-in to you, complimentary. So let's hear from the other side of Brussels, the three of us coming from Brussels this morning. Okay.
No, thank you very much, Terry, and also from my side, big thank you to the NATO Defense College Foundation for this opportunity, and my compliments to the organizing team for this wonderful setting for the conference today. I perhaps would like to start by mentioning something that has been mentioned by a lot of participants already today, and is saying that basically the security of EU, but also NATO, is closely interlinked with the security and stability of the Southern Neighbourhood. And the many cross-border nature of security threats really require joint action. And in this context, it is where the EU and NATO can play complementary and mutually reinforcing a role in supporting national peace and stability in the region. But I think it's quite important to mention is that we have indeed to move beyond this idea of crisis management in the region, and really look at the opportunities that are offered by the region, the untapped potential, and really see the region as a very close partner for, in this case, the EU, because it is also really in our interest to enhance this cooperation. And in the last year, the EU has taken several steps to really strengthen this partnership with the region. So first, we have the first ever commissioner for the Mediterranean, Dubravka Suica. And her nomination has led also to the creation of my Directorate General, so the Directorate General for the Middle East, North Africa, and the Gulf. So this is also quite a novelty in the EU. And the creation of this DG has then led to the publication of the Pact for the Mediterranean, which was actually launched last week in Barcelona on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Barcelona process. And I will come back to that, but also upcoming, we will have in the first half of 2026 a new Middle East strategy. So a lot of things on our side have developed quite recently. But let me go back to the Pact for the Mediterranean. So the Pact, for us, we really see this as an ambitious strategy, which aims to deepen the EU cooperation with its southern Mediterranean partner, and to turn the region into a common Mediterranean space. The pact outlines a practical framework, and I want to stress that, of cooperation, which will put forward a set of flagship initiatives that really have the potential to deliver tangible results. And if you allow me here, I think I can make a small link to also the NATO action plan, because for us as well with the pact, I mean, it has been the result of a very collaborative and inclusive approach where we have really discussed the pact with all of our 10 partners in the region, where we have made also broad consultation with different actors, regional entity, etc. So it has been really like a broad process with a lot of consultations. And this pact has 3 pillars. The first one is, and the focus is on people, because we really see people in the region as being really the driving force for change. The second pillar is about having a stronger, more sustainable economy. And the third pillar is about security. And here, I think we have to say that perhaps for the EU, the concept of security is actually very broad. So it goes obviously from issues about countering terrorism, violent extremism, but also about maritime security, the protection and resilience of critical infrastructure, hybrid threats, FIMI, peace mediation. So it's actually quite broad. And within the pact, as I said, so we have flagship initiative, we have 17 of them, and then we have hundreds actions. And in the third pillar, security, we have then very specific flagship actions. So we have one on peace and security. We have one on the operationalization of our cooperation on justice and law enforcement. But we also have an initiative, flagship initiative on border management, and then an initiative also on migration. And perhaps I can elaborate a bit further on that later on if needed. But going back perhaps and also then linking it a bit also to what Giovanni was mentioning and trying to make also the link then a bit more with NATO. So in the pact we have an initiative on peace and security, where it is clearly recognized that NATO is a strong partner for the EU and also in the region. But I have to say that EU and NATO, we are cooperating already quite well in the region. I mean, we have obviously our missions, we have our CSDP missions and operation in the region, and you have also then your mission in Iraq. In Brussels, I think we also have quite often staff-to-staff talks that are established and where we can share a bit of views on countries where NATO, for example, has their defense capacity building programs. So in the case of DG MENA, it would be Tunisia, Jordan, and Iraq. But then I think, yeah, we probably have also new opportunities upcoming. You were mentioning that we were recently at NATO, and we had also exchange a bit on the region, and hopefully also the NATO liaison office in Amman could open a door for additional cooperation. So I just wanted perhaps to flag that the cooperation is already quite good, and that we also look forward to develop cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Well, very nice. Thank you very much, Morgan. And we're going to now go to Katarzyna. And your background I found quite fascinating. You grew up on the eastern flank, but academically and professionally you focused on the southern flank. So I'm very interested to hear how you bring those two levels of expertise together today. And welcome. Sorry you couldn't make it in person.
Yes, I do apologize. I really wanted to come. Family considerations really stopped me from coming. But I've been following the conference all day, and I have to say it's been a fascinating exchange. So thank you so much once again to the organizers for having me. In my intervention, I will indeed try to kind of link the eastern and the southern flanks of the NATO. I was asked to talk about the calibrated engagement and security threats, and what I wanted to briefly focus on, I do promise to be rather brief to allow for having questions, but I did want to focus predominantly on the how the perceptions of security threats don't really fully align, both within NATO and between NATO and our partners. This is absolutely not new, and this has been mentioned by speakers today and during the previous conferences here at the Defense College. But I still think that there are some recent developments that justify talking a little bit more about this. And the first one is actually the already mentioned today's launch of the new US security strategy, which not only actually positions itself vis-a-vis EU and the conflict or the war against Ukraine in a particular way, but also, and I speak in this, those are my personal thoughts, this is in a way, an official position, but I almost have an impression that increasingly the US position is more aligned with the Southern partners' position when it comes to Russian aggression in Ukraine than the EU position. So there is this lack of alignment in some ways of how the perception of the Russian threat is framed within NATO itself. And that is linked also to the problem of kind of how generally the 2022 NATO strategy concept and where it expresses the belief that NATO allies and the EU member states share the same values and the same shared goals to uphold rules-based international order. This is also something where I feel increasingly we're looking at misalignment in both perceptions of security threat, but also ambitions. Now that leads me to second field in which we have misalignment of perception of security threat. And this comes within the MENA region and is linked to the September 2025 attack on Qatar. So from my observations now, I feel there's a little bit of a shift, especially particularly within the GCC countries, but more broadly within the region of the way that Iran has been and is still perceived and its network as the major, at least one of the main only sources of instability in the region, and how increasingly this is also the perception of Israel following an attack on Qatar. And I think it's important to think within NATO as well how this shift in perception of security threats within our partner in the Gulf can affect our cooperation going forward. Now, not to be completely on a negative side, I do think there are a couple of fields where our strategic interests and perceptions of security threats do align. They were mentioned previously today during the conference as well. There's definitely the maritime. This has been mentioned, as Morgan said, in the new pact. This is something that the Gulf partners have been focusing on. This has also been mentioned repeatedly by the US and is indeed underlined in this new US security strategy in the MENA section. So maritime security is somewhere where more calibrated engagement indeed could be foreseen. Another one is AI. This has also been mentioned today. And here there's definitely scope for calibrated engagement, but at the same time, potential to bring in slightly different EU pillar perception to the AI, a more human-centered, more centered also on the ethical questions, which in many ways could directly translate into security questions as well. And finally, just to close, and happy to discuss any of those points further, I do think this is a really good moment to have those discussions because, as Morgan mentioned, the Middle East strategy will be developed and then published in the first half of 2026. And it will be more of a security strategy than the pact. So this is really a good opportunity to try to brainstorm how perhaps the EU Middle East strategy could be more closely linked to NATO strategy for the Southern Partnership.
Thank you very much. Also interesting how you addressed quite directly some of the points that were made by the previous panel about alignment and equality. We'll talk more about that. Now, Lena, you're going to bring us a data-driven presentation now on regional security and sort of shared threat perception. We've been talking about that, but not shared in the way that necessarily NATO would like it to be.
Well, thank you so much. Well, first, I need the presentation to be visible before I can start. But I just want to say thank you for having me at this very timely conference. Perhaps while they get the presentation up, I'll just introduce what I do. It is up, okay. So Xtrack, as you can see, is where I work. It's a decision intelligence company, and we have our own AI platform that we use for geopolitical and security analysis. So today I'm going to talk about regional scenarios and NATO capabilities, in particular when it comes to the Southern Neighbourhood, but also the European pillar. Now, where do I point this? Because this is not advancing my... Okay, I need someone to tell me, please, how do I... Okay, finally this is working. Right. So I'm going to focus on opportunities and challenges when it comes to scenarios in the southern region. When it comes to opportunity, we've just heard about Iran. There is actually diminishing influence for Iran in the Southern Neighbourhood, and that brings an opportunity. When it comes to... Okay, I'm sorry, this is very frustrating for me because I am clicking and this thing is not moving. When it comes to regional scenarios and challenges, one of the big challenges that we are tracking and I am particularly interested in, which is of importance to NATO, is the existing air and sea lift that is linking up the Middle East, North Africa and the Sahel, and this is obviously a Russian air sea lift that we're talking about. Both those things, the opportunity regarding Iran and the challenge regarding Russia, are rooted in key realities in the South. First key reality is that theaters are actually interconnected. And a second key reality is that both challenges and opportunities cannot really be managed with military tools alone. What NATO really needs is integrated political, civilian, informational, and military capabilities. So just very briefly, because we've heard a lot about this already in terms of the core tasks of NATO, when it comes to deterrence and defense, some of the things that NATO's European pillar can strengthen are narrative awareness and situational awareness, such as by having a European-led architecture along these two issues, and also strengthening C4ISR intelligence, surveillance, etc. When it comes to crisis prevention and management, one of the things that NATO's European pillar can strengthen is having an early warning system, which by design would be civil-military. So for example, by having civil-military fusion cells, and as we heard just before, increasing cooperation between the EU and NATO. And when it comes to cooperative security, partnerships, again, as we've heard, are the building blocks here. And I'm calling for more political engagement and more defense capacity building regarding NATO's partners in the South. Now I'm going to talk about some concrete examples because I can't talk about everything in detail, but just to bring you a concrete illustration of what I'm talking about when I mention narrative awareness and situational awareness. So as I said, I work for Xtrack, and one of the things my colleagues have been tracking is, for example, Russian sentiment towards Iran. And this is just to show you the sentiment as it has changed over the last 3 months. Now, the color at the very, very bottom, the kind of bluish, greenish color, that is positive sentiment. So you can actually see that over the last 3 months, and this is just to give you a snapshot, if we are to collate Russian expressed sentiment online regarding Iran, only 7% of it is positive. Why is this important? It's because these actual narratives that are circulating by Russia can be counterintuitive, because there has been a dominant, I would say, assumption that actually when it comes to Iran, Russia and Iran are very much in the same camp, and that there is a lot of alignment and coordination. When we do this analysis, we find that actually there is an opportunity here, because Iran is indeed more isolated than perhaps many people may think. Another example I wanted to give you is on situational analysis regarding Russia's air and sea lift linking Syria, Libya, and the Sahel. So one of the things we are tracking is military movements by Russia in this region. So these things here that you are seeing are just some of the events that have been going on. And so here what we are finding is a number of interesting developments, such as in October this year, Russian flights between Libya and Syria resumed. In November, just last month, Russia announced plans for observation posts in southern Syria, and announced that its plans for military deployment in Syria will actually be bigger than even during the Assad era. And when tracking sentiment online and what the Russian aligned sources are saying, we found that Russia sees Libya as a buffer against what it says is European influence, and also that Russia is framing its Mediterranean presence as enabling what it says is strategic influence against NATO's or over NATO's southern flank. This is a direct quote from one of the Russian sources. And here on the right, you'll just see an example of some of the Russian aligned sources that we've been able to track, talking explicitly about the strategic importance of Syria for Africa and for Russian geopolitics in the southern neighborhood. There's plenty of examples. This is just to illustrate my point. And so what we learn here is that it's not just narratives that can be counterintuitive, but actual situations can also be counterintuitive. And the reason why I'm emphasizing the air and sea lift regarding Russia, the Mediterranean region, and Africa is that, again, there's a dominant discourse that Russia has had a drawdown in Syria and is no longer influential there, or that Syria doesn't matter as much. But actually what we're finding is that Russia sees both Syria and Libya as springboards for further African deployment. So the conclusion here is that there are some regional scenarios bringing challenges and others bringing opportunities, and I think that ultimately NATO could do with increasing its capabilities within its European pillar, where it has strengths to address these two things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina. And I'm going to stick to my promise to only ask minimal questions myself, but I'm going to start with a question to the entire panel following on your presentation. For example, as somebody who is covering NATO every single day, Javier, sorry, Giovanni, I was thinking of Colomina. I was thinking of him in my head. We do not talk about the southern flank a lot in public at NATO. It doesn't come up in press conferences. Secretary General doesn't bring it up. And following on what Lina says, is there a gap? Is it dangerous that you are not putting out a NATO, and also to you, Morgan, an EU narrative there that is sort of just empty in terms of what we're hearing coming out of the institutions, the two institutions here? And Lina, how dangerous is that? And Katarzyna, come back in whenever you feel like it there. Should you be talking about it more? Because obviously Russia is capitalizing on that gap in public narrative. And I'm sure you do it behind closed doors, but honestly, we talk about the eastern flank all the time. And not the southern flank. So, Lina, if you could just come back in. You mentioned narrative for, particularly. Do you see that? What could NATO do? I mean, you said that there, and the European Union as well, which is actually more active on FEMI than NATO at the moment.
Okay, what I'm calling for in a nutshell is deep awareness of what is actually going on in this very sprawling neighborhood. And yes, earlier we heard that there has to be differentiation because it's not one homogeneous block, and that is true. However, that doesn't mean that we should be blind to the interconnectedness between the theaters. So for example, the national security strategy just released by the US is very much divided into regions of the world where the Middle East is in one part and Africa is another. But as we are seeing here, the theaters are interconnected. So actually it would not do us any favors, whether as NATO or the European Union or as European countries, and I'm from the UK, so I count the UK as a European country as well. It doesn't do us any favors to have an artificial division applied to the dynamics that are going on in this region, whether we're talking about the circulation of narratives or if we're talking about the actual movement of weapons, for example.
Or if we're not talking about it at all. Giovanni.
Well, I wouldn't say that we don't communicate. One of the reasons why Javier Colomina was appointed as Special Representative was exactly that, to actually step out the game on communication. He tries to be as present as possible, as active as possible. He goes to all public events, and there
hasn't been one.
Maybe it's that's something we can fix. But maybe he travels too much. But we'll try to take care of this as well. As I say now, he's the Doha Forum, so that's another opportunity to publicly kind of communicate NATO. But let me admit that it's not an easy game, because of course there's a battle narrative that's ongoing, in which we have our adversaries that are very much leveraging narratives, sometimes fed also with the disinformation, which of course are not helpful. NATO is an organization that communicates honestly, and that is, of course, in a battle narrative in which the counterpart is not always honest, puts you on your back foot very often, because we live nowadays in a world in which communication is clips of 10 seconds on TikTok, things like that. So there are ideas that actually enter into the houses and the mind of people based on very, very short messages, which very often are misleading.
Story of my life.
And it's very, very difficult actually to have a chance to bring forward a narrative which is maybe more complex, more kind of rooted to reality, and with all the limitation that the international organization has, because obviously NATO works by consensus. There are a number of things that we cannot do also in terms of communication, because we need to kind of work on the minimum common denominator. And very often this limitation is also exploited by adversaries.
But a communications vacuum is also dangerous. Morgan, is the EU doing more of that? Because at NATO also there has been a drawback in wanting to talk about countering disinformation. That term is not even being used at NATO anymore. That might surprise some of our audience, but that's one of the new strategies. But FEMI is still alive and well at, or countering FEMI is still alive and well at the EU. So what are you doing in this sphere? I'm really interested in this as somebody who reports on these issues.
No, but I think, we are a bit in the same situation as NATO, and we have been trying quite a lot in recent time to really step up our game in the MENA region. And I was mentioning the creation of our DG or commissioner. We have the pact on which we still now need to deliver, because this was a first, this political strategy. Now we have to deliver on it, and we have to work on this action plan that will come in January. Then we'll have, as I had mentioned, also the Middle East strategy. But I think we haven't stopped being in the region, and I think this is by being in the region that we can also make a difference. We have all of our permanent representation in the region. The EU continue also to be the main financial contributor to Gaza, for example, and I think this is something that we do not have to forget. We have several CSDP mission in the region, so I think we are there. Then it's true that I would also agree that FEMI is not always the right word, because at the end we have foreign interference, but we also have just the manipulation of information. And I think this is also important when we speak about the MENA region, that is not necessarily coming from outside, it's also coming from the region. And this is something that we have to tackle. And for that, I mean, we can use a plethora of different methods, work with journalists, with media outlets, focus more also on education. I think this is quite an important point, especially in the MENA region, where half of the population is very young, below 25 years old. So I think this is something that we have also to have perhaps continue to work on.
Katarzyna, would you like to come in on that, on how much countering, I mean, deterrence and defense also relies on communicating what you're doing. And that, as Morgan points out, is most effectively done when you have people in the region. Do you think that the EU and NATO are doing enough?
I would say there's an increase in efforts, especially on the part of the EU in the recent years. When you look at the Stratcom, of course, the efforts in the south don't match the ones in the east. So I would say there's simply room for improvement on that. And I would add also another layer on this need for communication is also internally this connection that Alina mentioned between theaters, and actually between the theater in the east and in the south. So how Russia is using its actions in the Southern Neighbourhood to feed and finance its war against Ukraine. And this is also something that needs to be strengthened more and more internally as well, so that all the members of the UN, of the NATO, actually perhaps have more awareness of how of the importance of what's going on in the southern in the southern flank, but also of how Russia is skillfully using both theaters to its own ends.
Giovanni pointed out, when you don't have to follow any rules, it makes it awfully easy to put out your tweets, your posts on X, your posts on social media. Okay, I'm going to keep my promise and open to the audience. I particularly would love to hear from students. If any are still awake out there. Okay, I'll take this gentleman here. Please tell us who you are. And students, please have your questions ready. We've got time. I actually left time. Yes.
Good evening, General Diella, retired. Francesco Diella was the former Cooperative Security Director in the International Military Staff from 2020 to 2023. So I cannot miss the opportunity to make some questions, a couple of questions actually to Giovanni. But before I want to make a short comment, because in my opinion, the problem of cooperative security is the poor brother between the three core tasks. And in this way, we are missing the novelty, the renewal that the new strategic concept made from 2010, which means that the three core tasks are complementary. So all together, they work all together to achieve the collective defense. But now NATO is focusing a lot, too much in my opinion, to war fighting. And so the terrorism defense is the most important issue. And in this way, again, we are forgetting the lesson coming from the NATO 2022 strategic concept. Because complementary means that also partners can work with NATO, providing also support for the terrorism defense. I mean, terrorism is the second threat.
The second of two.
So how to deal with terrorism without the partners in the south? Just to give you an example.
So your question is to whom?
No, considering the NATO European tools, I want to address my questions to Giovanni about the hub for the south.
Oh yeah.
The hub for the south. The task force said that we have to change something in the hub for the south because it doesn't work, because the hierarchical position is not effective. I do not agree about this, because the hub for south was born with some commitments and.
Okay, we've only got 10 minutes left. If
Okay. So the hub for the south is what is going on about the hub for the south. And the second question is, when I led the delegations for the NATO African Union staff talks, they requested me a political presence there. how is working now.
Okay, Giovanni, would you like?
So basically, I hear maybe three questions. One is the poor
At
brother,
least.
which thank you, General Diallo, for the questions. But you yourself, you said that all three core tasks are contribute to achieving collective defense, which I could refer to the first core task. So it's true that when we deal with the southern neighborhood and when we deal with the eastern flank, of course the approach has to be different, because the approach toward the eastern flank is of deterrence and defense. It is of collective defense. We are talking about an adversary. When we talk about the south, it's true that Russia is in the south. It's true that we have a strategic competition in the south. At the same time, we have partners in the south, not adversaries, with which we want to work. And that is why cooperative security is the core task to deploy from this point of view. And that's why our approach is capacity building, reinforcing the institution of the partner countries. And actually, it's a two-way street. Also learn from them and the challenges they have. But it is true, certainly, there's now a tendency to kind of go back to the first core task for everything that we do in NATO. And I think this tendency will continue, or will have to adapt, as we always have. About your second question, the hub for the South, the hub is going through a reform, and which we hope to deliver before the summit in Ankara, because also the hub for the South needs to adapt, has worked since 2017 based on a mandate which now needs to be revised. So actually, I'm going to be part of this change, because I will chair the political committee that will be in charge of providing the new functions. We already have the military committee that's worked on that. So I think we will get there before the summit. But I think what is fundamental there is to make the hub more effective instruments in contributing to the priorities at NATO headquarters, being its output has to be more meaningful for what matters at NATO headquarters, and that has been the political direction that we have received from allies. Your third question is about the NATO Africa Union. So we have a military mission there. We as NATO have been advocating for a political presence as well. We might have a political advisor to the military mission, so not really a political presence as such that report to NATO quarters, but more that works for the military mission. But as you heard also in the previous panel, there are still some scar tissue in the African Union about the 2011 operation of NATO in Libya. In my mind, unjustified, because for NATO it was a military mission that was carried out properly. The problem in Libya was that there were no institutions by design. So basically, the country fell apart into chaos the moment the international community couldn't step in following the military operation of NATO. Because again, NATO, as I said before, is not a Swiss knife. We couldn't be there to contribute to everything. We could maybe provide some niche capabilities, which were maybe about security sector reform, something like that. But what was needed there was a master plan of the international community, which not being there led the country to collapse. But I keep hearing this criticism towards NATO about being responsible for the situation in Libya, which actually had spillover effects in other areas. We talk about the Sahel as well, and some of the crises which are ongoing in Africa are also influenced by the situation and continues there. But so in the African Union, there is still this mindset. But from our perspective, the African Union is actually an organization that more and more has been offering, also from the UN, the possibility to act more in the continent, to provide actually regional solution to regional problems. And NATO has always been ready to support the African Union in this. We heard some examples before, and we're ready to do that. As I say, the political dialogue is at the basis of what we do. Of course, if there's no political dialogue, we don't understand properly what politically organization will want and how they want to interact with NATO. Is more difficult for us to actually deploy something meaningful. And that is why we've been certainly advocating for a political kind of linkages with the African Union. But I can say, and the representatives are here, it is the same for the Gulf Cooperation Council, it is the same for the League of Arab States, with which we would be very happy to have a more structured, like at least a staff to staff, secretariat to secretariat kind of relationship. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yes. And that's going to be, unfortunately, our last one. The time goes so fast.
Dr. Khatib, thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful to have the data visualized. You referred to
can you tell us who you are?
Oh, yes. I'm John Paul Calzanetti. I'm
one of the organizers, I might
currently have the privilege of interning with the NATO Defense College Foundation. So thank you again for your presentation. You had referred to the divisions in the new U.S. national security plan as being artificial. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that, ideally mentioning the methodology that they use to come up with these divisions, if you're familiar with it, and what you might recommend as a more organic or natural or realistic approach to this very complicated issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I must admit, I only glanced at.
I know we didn't have time to read it well.
National security strategy. Only glanced at it. It's several pages long, and it only just came out. And I am not familiar with what methodology they used for that particular strategy, but it's quite common for foreign ministries all over the world to kind of have the Middle East in one part, Africa in another part, and you know that includes where I come from in the UK. But my illustration here about the link between theaters and, you know, as we just heard also from Katarzyna, is to say that yes, it is helpful to also, in addition to doing that, to look at interconnections. And so I'm not saying that the methodology is not valid. I'm just saying this is a capability that in this example, I'm talking specifically about NATO's European pillar. It's a capability that could be strengthened. Especially when it comes to the Southern Neighbourhood, because it's so important for Europe, when it comes to maritime routes, when it comes to trafficking, when it comes to migration. This is a neighbourhood in which all those flows are happening across Asia and Africa and the Middle East, actually. And it's not just you know, one part of the Southern Neighbourhood that is affecting Europe's security and well-being. So that's basically what I'm talking about. Thank you.
And that wraps up our time. It goes so quickly. Just a couple of observations to sort of wrap up not just our panel, but what we heard in the previous panels as well. There seems to be, and one would hope there is more sensitivity to the fact that these countries in the Middle East and North Africa are not a problem in NATO and the European Union's backyard, that they're equal partners who can help provide mutual security, that this needs to be equal discussions, that not simply consultations, but co-decision making, more recognition that everyone has a different perception of threat, and that it's dangerous to leave a vacuum there. Also that NATO and the European Union are taking this much more seriously, and that this is going to be one of the areas where the two institutions cooperate more intensively than perhaps we've seen in the past, which is encouraging, and I'll be watching that from Brussels. So as we've all mentioned, thank you so much to the Foundation Defense College for having us. It was really a privilege to be here with all of you here and these panelists. And I would like to have you stay in your seats because we are going to have concluding remarks now for, hold on, let me get my notes here. Abdulaziz Al-Washid, the Assistant Secretary for Political Affairs and Negotiations from the GCC in Riyadh. And then he will be followed by Hossam Zaki, the Assistant Secretary General for the League of Arab States from Cairo. So thank you so much for your attention. And thank you to Lorenza especially for the organization. And we will, I believe we will move off the stage and let the gentleman have his remarks. Thank you.
I need you, Giovanni. Thank you very much. I was told to rush to the theater as soon as possible to the stage. So, Giorgia Meloni was in the Gulf 2 days ago, and she presented some really good ideas that somehow coincided with the points I was planning to say here. And I was pleased, actually, that that Italy is thinking along the same lines as the GCC regarding South-North dialogue, and in particular between NATO and the Gulf. She identified 3 areas: Gaza and Palestine, Iran, counterterrorism, and also I would like to add maritime security. These are the 4 areas I think that lend themselves to cooperation between NATO and the GCC. And also she, at the end of her remarks, she suggested an idea that I will come to later that might be a new way of organizing the discussion around these issues. And so on the first one, Gaza, Palestine, when I spoke here a year ago, I think the situation was much different. I think there is some hope now. The peace deal that was approved by the Security Council and the commitment in particular by the United States to see this through, which is completely different from the situation last year when the United States was not interested in putting an end to the conflict during the last months of the Biden administration. So this is a new element and a welcome element. The core of the peace plan is the International Security Force, which is contemplated to include about 20,000 troops from about 24 countries. Several countries have expressed interest. More countries have been named as potential contributors. It's going to be a huge logistical nightmare to put this together, basically to put together a joint command in short order. And who else beside NATO has had almost 8 years of experience in joint command? So I think whether NATO, works with this force at an institutional and formal way or not, which is probably not very likely to have a formal link, but at least to give the expertise, the logistical support, the idea on how to run this force, because it needs to work right away. Already the United States Central Command is working on this. They're setting up in southern Israel, but how to organize contributions, troops, forces from around the world is going to be very difficult. And as we know, time is of essence because we have at least two groups, that are really not interested in seeing this peace agreement implemented. One is the right-wing elements in the Israeli government, and the second one is the hardliners in Iran. And I think both of them are not interested in this peace, and so they will exploit any delays, and we see that happening. But I think we shouldn't exaggerate the ceasefire violations, because if you look at the numbers last year, we're talking about 100 people killed a day. And since October 10th, the beginning of the ceasefire, until now, less than 400 have been killed. Yes, it's a terrible number, but this is about 6 people, 7 people a day. Just the other day, the Israelis burnt some people alive in their tents, and it's a terrible situation. But I think the ceasefire agreement has produced some effect in lessening the human toll of the Israeli attack on Gaza. The genocide, is now on hold, but for how long we don't know, because really the peace agreement has to be implemented quickly, or else we'll go back to the genocide as orchestrated by Israel. The second one that Meloni mentioned is Iran, and she focused in particular on the nuclear file, and that's, I think, another area that NATO could help with. NATO has a long experience in this area and countering proliferation, and this is a key concern for the Gulf countries and for the world in general. So that's another area for cooperation. And counterterrorism, and this is really an extremely important area. If you look at the situation in Syria, again, this is another area where the situation is completely different today than it was a year ago when we spoke here, when I spoke here. We have a new government. It's fully committed to fighting terrorism and drug trafficking and all of that. They mean well, and I think they just need the means to deliver on the promises they have made. I think they're doing an excellent job, but NATO could help in providing the expertise on fighting terrorism. I'm thinking along similar lines to what's happening in Iraq, for example. I think Giovanni talked about that. So that kind of mission will be extremely helpful, because at the core of the conflict between the northeast, the Kurds, and Damascus is the counterterrorism. The rationale behind the United States presence there is counterterrorism, and also the rationale behind Turkish presence there is counterterrorism. And every one of those four groups is claiming that they can do it better. But I think NATO could help the Syrian government, could help Damascus to organize itself to actually be a credible replacement for all of those, for the Syria Democratic Forces and for the Kurdish presence and for the US presence, whether it's guarding the two camps or preventing ISIS from regrouping, Daesh from regrouping. And finally, on maritime security, the largest coalition of maritime forces in our region is the CMF, the Combined Maritime Forces. I think it has now about 47 countries and 5 task forces. All the Gulf countries are members of this, active members of this coalition. It's led by the United States. And about maybe 1/3 of its membership is actually NATO members. The capabilities of the CMF, especially in the Red Sea, is quite limited. And I think Meloni reminded us in Bahrain the other day, 2 days ago, of the history of Italy's involvement in that region. Actually, Italy maintained, or the Roman Empire maintained a military presence in an island, in a Saudi island now, to protect the trade routes coming from India, beside their land-based garrisons. Today, what we see in the Red Sea is actually a vacuum that several groups are trying to fill, some with good intentions and some with less good intentions. So I think this is an area that we need to develop, whether it's training local forces, such as Eritrea, where you have a big gap there, or Yemen, that Italy used to help train the Coast Guard of Yemen before the current crisis, or by the international presence there through beefing up the task force, the 5th task force and the most recent one that deals with the Red Sea. So these are the 4 areas, and I think that we need to focus on for meaningful GCC-NATO dialogue or cooperation. Meloni, as I said, suggested a way of doing it. She said she offered to host a GCC-Med summit here in Italy and to address those issues and other issues. And I think it's a good idea, but in preparation for that summit, when it takes place, if it takes place, that we need to organize ourselves in discussions around these 4 priority areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I particularly thank those who remained in the room at the end of this afternoon's discussions. I think it is very, very difficult to speak last on a conference like this, because so many important ideas have been said, and it is difficult to address each and every one of them. But the thoughts for me are quite clear. At the League of Arab States, first of all, for those of you who do not know, the League of Arab States has a membership of 22 countries, and it stretches from Mauritania, Morocco in the west to Oman and UAE in the east. Quite a large surface, and a variety of countries, a variety of development levels, of political engagements, political interests, political threats, and neighborhoods. So you have countries neighboring the Sahel, and you have countries neighboring Iran, and you have countries neighboring almost Europe and Turkey and otherwise. So it's a big variety, and we have various interests. What we can say about the cooperation with NATO is that we do not have a structured dialogue with NATO. We do not have that. That is due, in fact, to some reasons. Some of them relate to the fact that NATO may not have the reputation that would give it a unanimous approval within the Arab League for a structured dialogue with the Arab League. Why? Because some of the member states of the Arab League have been on the receiving end of some interventions by NATO, and that has complicated their view of NATO and the dialogue with NATO. But that is and should not be, in the view of the Secretariat led by the Secretary General. It should not be something that should be a constant hurdle in the dialogue with NATO. We should think of better ways, more ways to have a dialogue with NATO, and preferably a structured dialogue. Now, the problem also with having a dialogue with NATO is that our region has had more than a decade and a half of upheaval, and that is beside the Palestinian question. Now, many, of course, participants spoke about Palestine and Gaza and remedies for the situation. I think we should address that. This is an issue that will not go away if we do not put our hands together in order to impose a solution. And when I say impose a solution, I mean working actively in order to make the different parties agree on a solution. That is not something that we see for the moment. The effort that has been deployed by the United States is remarkable, and I think they have done something that no other country would have been capable of doing. But we need to be also realistic. This is a conflict, a situation that needs constant care, constant pushing, constant pressure on the parties, especially on the part of Israel, in order to get to where it should be getting. But there are other issues in the region as well. So we have heard today, for instance, issues that stretch from political instability and they go all the way to the collapse of state structures in a variety of states, including states in members of the Arab League. So we are we have to deal with those issues, and we have to deal with those issues with the help of partners who can show good faith in helping those countries get out of their predicaments. So the feeling here, and please get this sentence that I'm about to say right. The feeling here is that the Arab states do not want to feel like a play field. They want to feel more like players. And that, of course, is something that has to do with balance of power and many other elements. But the feeling of a play field is different than a feeling of players. We need to feel that we are part and parcel of a meaningful dialogue that would result into something that will change our future to the better. Is it possible or not? We are yet to see this. We are heartened to know and to listen to the developments that are taking place with the GCC dialogue. GCC is an important component, a very important component of the Arab League, and we need to see that they enjoy stability and they enjoy wealth and they enjoy political influence, so we need to make sure that they are engaged. They're not alone. There are other players in the region as well. We need to feel that this kind of partnership exists and for the better of all players. Last but not least, I think the issue of having a structural dialogue cannot be overemphasized, and we have had many attempts throughout the past 25 years, according to the notes that were prepared for me before coming here, but all those attempts have unfortunately failed. So I think we need to focus on that issue. We need to listen to each other more, and we need to have a resolve on both sides on how to change that situation and make sure that when we have a dialogue, it is structured, it is institutional, and it will get somewhere positive. Thank you very much for listening.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of a long afternoon. We have covered an enormous number of subjects, perhaps too many, I don't know. But you know, when you have the occasion to have such good speakers, distinguished people coming from the region, it's an occasion that you cannot lose. So I think that of course, we are all a little bit tired to listen to so many points, you know, and also discussing in our own mind, you know, how we react to that, because we had a number of opinions, including the Sahel and Palestine and whatever. It's difficult. But anyway, I think that it has been a very enriching conference. I hope that you share my view. And I thank you for your attention. I thank the speakers, first of all, and our two distinguished guests, making the closing remarks, which were very sharp, in fact, you know, because they were sort of concluding really what we discussed today, you know, without focusing on one point or another. So this really shows the quality of their intervention, and also the rest of us. And of course, there is also, if you like, a personal touch there, because some of the speakers are my close friends, you know, Ahmad and Ambassador Karem and others. So I'm so happy to have had you here. So again, thank you very much. Grazie a tutti. Siete stati molto bravi a restare qui per 4 ore, ma gli argomenti erano molto interessanti e credo che ne valesse la pena. Buonasera.